Story 1.
Caught my cheating wife at a restaurant, confronted her, divorced her, then ghosted her forever. The entire episode kicked off when I ventured into an unfamiliar place. Having dropped off one of our more bothersome clients at the airport, enduring a morning filled with his complaints, I felt no rush to return to the office. Given the dreary Tuesday and the prospect of an afternoon reviewing contracts, I decided to stop at a drab-looking bar restaurant about a mile from the airport. The plan was to enjoy a leisurely lunch and a beer or two before heading back to work in the salt mines. Seated in a booth, savoring my beer and contemplating the challenge of finding a decent burger in this world, my attention was captured by a couple entering the restaurant. Observing as they settled into a booth across the room, sitting side by side, I couldn't help but notice the woman. A shapely blonde in a short skirt, showcasing her attractive legs, paired with a tight pink short-sleeved top. Her companion seemed like a thug wannabe, struggling to pull off the look in skinny jeans and a black leather jacket. My heightened interest in this seemingly happy couple becomes clear when I reveal that the woman was Shelley, my sister-in-law, and the guy with her was undoubtedly not her husband, my brother Dave. Worse still, it was evident they were more than casual acquaintances. They placed their drink orders with the waitress and immediately engaged in unrestrained displays of affection, necking in the booth. Shocked, I watched as the guy slid his hand up her thigh, under the short skirt. Shelley broke their kiss, letting her head fall back against the booth, sighing. The question wasn't whether I would address this situation, that was a given. The real dilemma was whether I could restrain myself from confronting them violently right there in the restaurant. I had never been fond of Shelley, disliking her from the time my brother started dating her. My pessimism persisted when he fell head over heels in love with her and announced their marriage just 4 months into the relationship. Dave, at 23, seemed unaware of what he was getting into, however. There was simply no way to convey to him that Shelley was everything to him. To me, she was a pretty, cheerful, somewhat shallow and selfish girl, not nearly as smart or interesting as Dave himself. They both seemed to adore the same person, Shelley. He would do anything for her, and that's exactly what she liked. To my pleasant surprise, the first 3 years of their marriage appeared to be very happy. However, the scene unfolding 30 feet from me suggested that the happy days were over. The guy she was with now had his hand on Shelley's waist, kissing her neck as he worked her over. With her eyes closed, she didn't see me approach and was startled when I sat down across the table from them, casually greeting Shelley. The comical moment unfolded as her eyes popped open and her boyfriend pulled his hands off her. Turning to look at me, her face went from momentarily startled to stunned and then truly shocked. Her jaw dropped and she froze, staring blankly at me. His face held the same startled look momentarily before turning annoyed. Before he could speak, I continued in a cordial manner, inquiring about how she'd been and asking about Dave. Turning to him and extending my hand, I introduced myself as Will, Shelley's brother-in-law, emphasizing the connection to her husband Dave. His eyes widened, and he sat frozen, ignoring my hand. Shelley began to recover herself, babbling about Robbie being an old friend. With a friendly smile, I casually remarked on the relationship situation they were caught in, leaving Shell gasping and hoping I hadn't witnessed their activities. Robbie abruptly stood up and muttered that he had to leave. Without even a glance back at Shelley, he walked swiftly out of the restaurant. Later, I casually remarked to Shelley that Robbie seemed like a nice guy and questioned why he left so suddenly. Internally, I seethed with rage at the treatment my brother Dave was receiving from this woman. Expressing my frustration, I kept my voice down but made it clear that Dave adored Shelley, doing everything for her. However, it wasn't enough for her, as she engaged in illicit activities with a questionable individual sporting greasy hair and a poorly executed Matt Dillon mustache. Shelley looked terrified, her face turning pale in response to my accusations. She stammered, trying to explain, but her voice trailed off without a conclusion. After observing her for a minute, I unleashed my anger, expressing disappointment at her actions. I questioned how long this had been going on and how many others she was involved with. Shelley pleaded, grabbing my hand desperately, and begged me not to tell Dave. Despite her pleas, I considered informing my brother about his wife's infidelity. I questioned whether he deserved to know the truth about the person he was married to. Shell was either incredibly naive or too stunned to think clearly. I pulled my hand free, contemplating whether I should reveal the painful truth to Dave. Her eyes were wild, and she seemed to be thinking frantically. I sat back with a smile, curious about what she would offer to keep me silent. Shelley, after some contemplation, changed her expression. She pleaded with me not to tell Dave, promising to reveal the entire story. According to her, she claimed that another woman, someone I was involved with, was cheating on me. I laughed at the seemingly far-fetched revelation. Shelley looked at me steadily, insisting that she wasn't kidding. According to her, the other woman had been seeing a guy from the health club for at least a couple of weeks. This certainty unsettled me, even though I knew it to be impossible. We had been together for 7 happy years of marriage and a decade overall. She was devoted, sensible, kind, thoughtful, and the most honest person I knew. She loved me, and I was sure of it, just as sure as I was of my own love for her. Shelley leaned forward, sensing my confusion. She claimed to be telling the truth, mentioning that the other woman had confided in her about the affair the previous week. I scrutinized her face, trying to gather my thoughts. Despite her initial terror, Shelley appeared calm and in control, as if she were sharing a genuine revelation rather than spinning a wild and desperate tale. While I couldn't immediately dismiss what she was saying, it was challenging to believe given our history and her recent behavior. Seated at the dinner table, my gaze returned to Shelley, who seemed to be anticipating my next move. Although I didn't reveal it to her, concealing her infidelity from Dave was not an option. I needed to uncover the truth about him. I spoke slowly, suggesting that perhaps we could reach an agreement. After some contemplation, I expressed my unwillingness to let Anne deceive me. I proposed that if Shelley could help me gather information about Anne's actions, I wouldn't disclose what I had witnessed that afternoon to Dave. However, I laid down a condition: she had to swear not to see Robbie or any other man besides Dave. Relief washed over her face as she swore to comply. She asked, "Will you have my word on it?" I remained skeptical about the value of her word. Responding to her question, I inquired about what she would be willing to do to fulfill her part of the agreement. Expressing my desire to gather information about Anne's affair, I suggested a plan to Shelley. I proposed providing her with a tape recorder to conceal in her apartment. The idea was for her to invite Anne over, offer some wine, and engage in casual conversation, encouraging Anne to reveal details about her affair. I specified that I wanted to know the identity of the man, when and how the affair started, how often she had been with him, and the reasons behind her actions. As I spoke to Shelley, I realized that I was starting to believe her unusual story about Anne's infidelity, which infuriated me. Shelley nodded in agreement, stating that she could carry out the plan. She suggested softening Anne up by sharing the details of my own affair, making it feel like a genuine relationship conversation. Sarcastically, I questioned if Robbie was the only one who had been involved with her or if there were others. She quickly denied any others, but I remained unconvinced. 20 minutes later, I was driving back to the office, contemplating somber thoughts about the potential end of Dave's marriage and the looming possibility of the end of mine. My first instinct might have been to call Dave and inform him about what I had witnessed Shelley doing, but I recognized that it wasn't an option. I had always been the steady older brother, while Dave was the charming and outgoing one with a history of short-lived relationships due to his talkative nature. When Dave met Shelley, everything changed. Despite being a confident and charming individual, he became a lovesick schoolboy. Within a month or two, Shelley had completely captivated him, and he was determined to marry her. Dave idolized Shelley, considering her incapable of doing any wrong. Knowing Dave's unwavering devotion to Shelley, I refrained from speaking to him until I had concrete evidence. I realized that he wouldn't believe she was cheating unless he heard it directly from her. Despite my hopes that Shell might be lying or mistaken about Anne's faithfulness to me, the likelihood diminished. The possibility that Shelley could have lied to me out of desperation crossed my mind, but I also considered the consequences of discovering it was all a fabrication. When I arrived at my office, I took out a pad and made notes on the steps I would have to take if the worst turned out to be true. This included considerations about credit cards, selling the house, transferring car titles, and more. I hoped that in a few days I would be able to discard that sheet of paper. When I arrived home for dinner, cheerfully humming in the kitchen as she set the table, she greeted me with a big hug and a kiss, appearing as the loving wife I'd usually be happy to see at the end of the day. Despite my suspicions, cultivated over the past 7 years, I knew I had to play the innocent husband for a few more days. Underneath the surface, I felt a mix of fury and hurt, unsure of how to process my emotions. We chatted amicably during dinner, but when she mentioned her workout at the health club during dessert, I couldn't resist a bit of probing. I casually remarked to Shelley, commenting on her recent dedication to workouts. I asked if the club was now offering free ice cream. She laughed, though I noticed a slight flush on her face. She explained that she had been enjoying the positive feeling of a good, sweaty workout and coming home to her loving husband. She also mentioned that a few weeks ago the black slacks I liked were starting to feel tight, but now they fit perfectly. She beamed affectionately, and despite my concerns about her fidelity, I couldn't help but appreciate her beauty and my love for her. If she were truly cheating on me, I couldn't help but feel conflicted and unsure of how to navigate the situation. Despite what the court calendar officially stated, my marriage ended exactly 1 week later, on another Tuesday. Shelley and I had orchestrated everything. I provided her with a small tape recorder to hide in her living room, and she arranged for Anne to drop by for lunch on a Tuesday afternoon when Anne had a day off from work. Shelley, who didn't have a job, kept me on edge throughout that afternoon in my office, pretending to work, contemplating what the women were discussing and its potential impact on my life. At 4:30, when Shelley called and informed me that they were done and Anne had left, my heart sank. Desperately hoping for a different outcome, I asked if Anne had talked to her about it. Shelley, sounding a little drunk, giggled affirmatively. She shared that she had told Anne about Robbie, and Anne in turn disclosed details about Moran, emphasizing that he was a really big fella. Feeling the tension, I realized I was squeezing the phone so tightly that my fingers ached. I agreed to drop by in 20 minutes. When I reached Shelley's place, she handed me the tape recorder at the door, reminding me of the promise I made not to disclose anything. I assured her that he wouldn't hear a word from me. I emphasized the importance of ensuring that Anne never found out about the recording, as she might become furious and potentially tell Dave. Nodding in acknowledgement, I turned and left. That evening was one of the most painful of my life. Knowing I couldn't listen to the tape until Anne was asleep, I continued pretending to be the loving husband. While she was still a little tipsy, she shared that she had spent the afternoon with Shelley and had consumed a lot of wine. Additionally, she was amorous. After clearing the dinner dishes, she pulled me towards the bedroom, asking if I had a little something for her tonight in a flirtatious tone. I questioned whether I could or even wanted to go through with it. The thought crossed my mind that it might be the last time I would ever have closeness with Anne. Still hoping against all reason that she might not have been unfaithful, I followed her into the bedroom, and we had lovemaking. For me, it wasn't making love. My torn heart and worried mind overshadowed any pleasure. We rested for a while in each other's arms, then repeated the act. A few minutes later, Anne was fast asleep, snoring gently on her side next to me. I retreated to the guest room, closed the door behind me, and listened to the tape. The first few minutes of conversation between Shelley and Anne were breezy and casual, with Shelley keeping the wine flowing. After a while, she confessed to Anne that she had something to share. She proceeded to share the details of her affair with the a-hole Robbie. It became evident that Anne was already aware of the affair, and Shelley was merely providing her with the juicy specifics to soften her up. Shelley executed her role admirably, even confessing with a laugh that Robbie was just the latest, not the best. There had been a guy named Ellis, but unfortunately, he had moved out of town. Anne giggled and pretended to be shocked, though she appeared to be enjoying the story. The explicit details of the sleazy narrative had little effect on me. I already knew what Shelley was, and the added specifics would only make it easier to convince Dave that she had indeed cheated on him. Anxiously awaiting the inevitable, I resisted the urge to fast-forward the tape. Eventually, Shelley redirected the conversation towards Anne, expressing curiosity about my story. She giggled, mentioning that all I had shared so far was meeting him at the health club and his well-endowed nature. My body tensed as I listened to Anne's voice on the recording, laughing and describing Moran as amazing, the largest she had ever encountered. She went on to share more details, expressing initial doubts about it fitting inside her, leading to laughter from both women. Overwhelmed by the revelations, I stopped the tape and leaned back in my chair, absorbing the painful truth. My marriage was now officially over. Did I even want to hear the rest? I considered letting my lawyer listen to it. After some thought, I switched the machine back on. It was time to face the entire story, confront the anger and pain, and begin the process of figuring out what the rest of my life would look like. Shelley inquired about the beginning of the affair, asking how it started. Anne responded, explaining that she never meant to cheat on me and felt terrible about it. She mentioned our happiness together and expressed her disbelief in engaging in infidelity. She attributed it to having a bad case of BDF, which she found amusing. Laughing, Anne heard Shelley ask about BDF, and she promised to explain after having more wine. Anne continued sharing that she had been going to the health club for a couple of years to avoid getting saggy and to maintain my interest. A few months ago, she started noticing a new trainer named Moran, describing him as hot, with broad shoulders and amazing muscles. She mentioned his flirtatious behavior with women and recalled witnessing him talking quietly with Patty McAllister, a former colleague. Anne watched Patty enter Moran's office, and later, in the locker room, Patty appeared well-drilled, exhibiting a dreamy-eyed look and a vague smile. I greeted Patty and noticed her happy demeanor. She shared that she had a bad case of BTF, explaining it as big tool fever. She giggled, ensuring no one could hear her, and recounted her experiences with Moran, emphasizing his sensational qualities as a love-making partner and the impressive size of his tool. Patty described how Moran had flirted with her, eventually convincing her to go into his office, leading to an ongoing carnal relationship at the club. She expressed that he was incredible, providing her with the craziest lovemaking she had ever experienced. While her revelations caught my attention, I had no initial plans to take any action, considering Patty's divorce status and her freedom to play with whomever she liked. Over the next couple of weeks, my curiosity about Moran grew. I responded more attentively when he flirted with me, such as brushing against me or touching my shoulder while assisting me with the machines. During one workout session, as I performed bench presses in a nearly empty area, he stood behind me as if to spot me. Looking up, I noticed his shorts right above my head, and the sizable bulge of his package caught my attention. I couldn't believe how big and thick it looked in his shorts. He smiled down at me, aware of what I was looking at. I almost dropped the bar on my chest but managed to finish my reps. As I put the bar back on the rack, he took my hand off the bar and slid it gently down over his shorts. His tool felt as enormous as it looked, and it was hard as a rock. Then, after a couple of minutes, he gently pulled me to my feet, looked around to ensure no one was there, and led me by the hand into his office. I wasn't thinking, kind of dazed. He locked the door behind us, sat me down in a chair, and without a word, pulled off his shorts, standing in front of me. I swear I wasn't thinking at all. We had wild lovemaking. By the time he finished, I was beside myself, exhausted and totally spent. Shelley reacted with an impressed wow, and it seemed like she genuinely meant it. She assumed that Anne had continued seeing Moran. Anne explained that after the encounter in Moran's office, she had drifted into the shower feeling dreamy and weak in the knees, wiped out. She cleaned up and went home, overwhelmed by guilt and fear of being discovered by me. Surprisingly, I didn't suspect anything that night, and it seemed normal. Despite my desire for closeness, she made an excuse, fearing I might notice a change. The following night, she mentioned giving me the full treatment, engaging in closeness until I couldn't continue. Anne admitted staying away from the gym for 2 weeks following the incident. I just knew I couldn't be anywhere near Moran without being tempted again. Finally, I told myself it had been a one-time thing. I was a grown woman with a wonderful husband, and I could resist him. So I started going back, and the first couple of times it was fine. Moran winked at me and flirted a little, but he left me alone, and I thought, this is okay. I'm over this. I relaxed my guard a little. Then about a week after that, he caught me again at the bench, and the room was empty. He got my hand on his tool, and in no time, we were back in his office. Shelley finished her sentence, expressing how much better it was. Anne, speaking somewhat dreamily, struggled to describe the experience. She conveyed her deep love for closeness with me, emphasizing our satisfaction in each other, and confessed that she had never been tempted to fool around before, even with a flirtatious coworker named Alex. Despite his success with other girls, Anne had remained uninterested. However, with Moran, she felt as though she had never experienced such pleasure before. Giggling, Anne acknowledged the absurdity of sharing such details, emphasizing that there was nothing particularly special about Moran. She clarified that she had no interest in him as a person or a lover. It was solely about the physical aspect. She referred to it as God's gift, prompting laughter from both her and Shelley. I listened to the two of them and felt the anger coursing through my veins. I sat through the rest of the tape, but there wasn't much more. Once he'd had lovemaking with her a second time, he gave up all attempts to resist. She'd been with him 2 to 3 times a week for nearly a month, and there was no sign she was ready to stop. In fact, she said that she'd been enjoying lovemaking with me more lately as well, perhaps because her secret was kind of a turn-on. It was clear that her BTF had overcome whatever guilt she might have been feeling about betraying me, the love of her life, her husband of 7 years, the man who was completely devoted to her and who still remembered what forsaking all others was supposed to mean. It took a while to think through my plans, and it was 2:30 a.m. by the time I went to sleep in the guest room. I was done seeing and sleeping next to her or even talking to her. I slipped into the bedroom and got clothes for the next day without waking her. At 6:30 a.m., I was up and out the door. I left a brief and cold note, trying not to reveal anything, stating that Anne had an early meeting due to my call, apologizing for forgetting to mention it. I made 2 copies of the tape last night at the office. By 8:30, I was on the phone with my best friend from college, who worked at a downtown law firm. I requested a favor, asking him to arrange an hour with the meanest and most bloodthirsty divorce lawyer in his firm. There was a moment of silence, and he expressed shock, apologizing for the situation. After a brief conversation, Eddie showed me into the office of Margaret Adamson, a lead partner in his firm known for her intimidating presence. Eddie had described her as someone even sharks would avoid in the ocean. Margaret's look and handshake confirmed that she meant business, and I was already relieved that she would be representing me rather than Anne. I played Margaret and Eddie part of the tape. After hearing the initial moments, Margaret instructed her assistant to hold her calls, and we listened to the rest. When it concluded, we sat in silence for a minute. Margaret then straightforwardly asked, "Okay, what do you want?" Expressing my desire for a divorce due to infidelity. I emphasized avoiding the cliché of irreconcilable differences. I mentioned being reasonable about our savings but insisted on keeping the house. Additionally, I wanted Anne to revert to her maiden name, as I believed she no longer deserved to be Mrs. Will Harris. Margaret nodded, studying me intently, and then requested a brief break with Eddie to discuss the legal details. Within 5 minutes, I was back in Margaret's office, and she was ready to proceed. She assured me that the divorce would likely proceed smoothly with Anne accepting the terms. However, she mentioned that the tape would be inadmissible since Anne was unaware of its recording. I grimaced and disclosed the complication involving my sister-in-law Shelley's infidelity, her offer to help, and the content of the first part of the tape. I explained my intention to inform my brother, acknowledging that he would be devastated. Half ironically, I suggested Margaret consider handling my brother's divorce as well. She looked at Eddie and then back at me. We started by listening to Shelley's part of the tape, and after another huddle between Margaret and Eddie, she remarked, "Quite a pair of wives you two picked." Seeing my reaction, she apologized, acknowledging it was inappropriate. Margaret then outlined the situation, stating that the tape might not be admissible against Anne due to her unawareness, but Shelley could be subpoenaed to testify about what Anne told her. It shouldn't make much difference. Once Anne's attorney hears the tape, he won't be in much position to fight. In your brother Dave's case, the tape is admissible because Shelley knew she was being recorded, so she's got no defense whatsoever. That divorce will be easy as long as he's not totally unreasonable. Then there's the health club. We can sue both them and Moran. Moran won't have much money, presumably, but Eddie and I can pretty much guarantee you a nice big check from the club, somewhere in the high 6 figures to $1.5 million. The tape could be used in a civil lawsuit, and there's no way in hell they would ever let this get into the newspapers. Think of all the husbands who'd be canceling their wives' club memberships. She laughed briefly, maintaining a somewhat intimidating demeanor. Margaret assured me that she would initiate the divorce documents, and Eddie escorted me out of the office. He expressed his apologies, assuring me that Margaret would fulfill my requests. Despite feeling terrible about the situation, I tried to smile and reassured him, saying, "It's okay, Eddie. This just means you and I will have more time to play tennis together." I expressed my gratitude, thanked him, and left. The rest of the day, I submerged myself in details. I arranged a locksmith to meet me at the house at 4:30. I made a dinner date with Dave so I wouldn't be around when Anne came home. I cut off her credit cards and arranged separate accounts for our money. And I wrote her a note. It took several tries, not easy to say goodbye to the love of your life, even under these circumstances. When I finally finished it, I put it in an envelope, wrote Anne's name on the front, and took it home. The locksmith finished by about 5:15. I had a beer, sitting by myself quietly in the kitchen. Then I taped the note to the outside of the front door, locked it, and left. I knew Anne would be home between 6 and 6:30. I idly wondered what she'd do first, try the door and find her key didn't work, or read the note. "Our marriage is over now. You'll be free to play around all you want with Moran and his big tool. I've had the locks changed. If you want to get your clothing and personal things, call my attorney." I left Margaret's name and number. "She'll arrange for you to have supervised access to the house when I'm not here. I won't be talking to you again. You broke my heart. I loved you as much as any man can love a woman, and I looked forward to our growing old together. Too bad our marriage vows didn't mean as much to you as some lovemaking with a big tool, or as much as they did to me." When Dave joined me for dinner, he immediately sensed that something was amiss. After placing our orders, I took a deep breath and disclosed that Anne had been cheating on me, and I was planning to divorce her. His reaction was evident, staring at me with an open mouth, a sight I hadn't witnessed before. He expressed shock, exclaiming, "Oh my God, Will, my God. Anne, are you sure?" Realizing the obvious, he apologized, acknowledging it as a foolish question. He could see the truth in my expression and asked if I wanted to talk about it. I did, sharing my hurt and despair with my best friend over dinner. The beers provided some comfort, but having Dave's unwavering support meant even more. Towards the end of the meal, I revealed another aspect, mentioning that there's one part of it I haven't told him. Shelley is the one who got me proof. She taped a conversation of her and Anne talking, and Anne told her the whole sorry business. Dave looked at me sympathetically, expressing his sorrow. He added that he hoped it wouldn't make me angry, but he felt lucky to have a fantastic wife like Shelley. He mentioned that he's not surprised she helped me, as she has always liked me. He acknowledged that I haven't always approved of her but began praising her. I couldn't bear to hear more praise for Shelley, especially considering the circumstances. I interrupted him, saying, "Listen, Dave, wait. Don't say anything else. Let me pay the bill and I need you to come back to the house with me." A note with "Will" written on it in a flowery handwriting was found under the screen door. Without reading it, I dropped the note on the hall table and ushered him into the guest room. I communicated the seriousness of the situation to Dave, expressing my love for him and emphasizing our friendship. He responded with a wary look, not accustomed to such conversations. I urged him to listen to a tape recorded by Shelley, instructing him to stay seated while I went to another room. Rewinding the tape to the beginning, I pushed the tape recorder toward him and left. In the subsequent moments, I heard quiet murmurs from the tape, followed by a crash. Dave, seemingly agitated, paced around while the tape continued to play until it fell into silence. Upon entering the kitchen, Dave confronted me with intense anger, accusing me of relishing in the knowledge about Shelley and deliberately keeping it from him. He berated me for allowing him to praise her without revealing the truth. He insisted that I must be enjoying the situation, accusing me of harboring a long-standing dislike for Shelley. In response, I stood up and raised my voice, questioning what I had just discovered about him. My glare intensified, and gradually Dave's demeanor softened. His shoulders slumped, fists unclenched, and he sat down at the table, resembling an old man. After a moment, he apologized, saying, "Sorry, Will. I know you're hurting, just like I am. It's just, you obviously knew about this. Why didn't you tell me?" "Dave," I said as gently as I could, "you know how you were about Shelley. You would never have believed me. Remember that fight we had when I criticized something she'd said to Mom? I found out about Shell a week ago and I knew that I couldn't possibly tell you. You had to hear it for yourself. I only got the tape from her yesterday." The two of us emptied a few beer bottles while I told Dave the whole story. I began with seeing Shell and Robbie at the restaurant, then the deal she offered me, the making of the tape, and my conversation with Margaret Adamson. "She's handling my divorce, and she'll be happy to represent you too if you want. Our cases are pretty much a shoo-in," she says. We talked late into the night, and then Dave crashed in my guest room. He didn't have the heart to face Shelley. The phone rang several times, but we didn't answer it, and finally I just left it off the hook. A few days went by, and then a few weeks. Anne kept calling for a while, leaving me messages of her crying and begging to talk to me, but I didn't answer or call her back. I just didn't see any reason to talk to her. She tried finding me at work, but I'd asked our receptionist to tip me off, and I ducked out of my office each time she showed up. A couple of times I saw her car parked in front of the house when I came home from work, so I just drove right by and stayed away for a couple of hours until she left. Margaret Adamson did her work beautifully. The divorce papers were served. She fought through all the legal maneuvers that Anne's lawyer tried to pull, and a court date was set. In his initial conversations with Margaret, he claimed that no infidelity had taken place. Once she sent him a copy of the tape, we stopped hearing that line. Instead, he pointed out that the tape was inadmissible. Margaret didn't even dignify that one with a response. She just sat tight, and as the court date approached, Anne's lawyer finally called Margaret to ask for a settlement conference. The day after listening to the tape, Dave moved out of his apartment with Shelley and into my guest room. He drove over and watched the place until she went out, then called me. The two of us packed up everything he wanted and got out of there in less than 2 hours. He told me, "I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear a word she has to say. I just want to get the hell away from her." His eyes started to tear up and I turned away. Was it a good thing or a bad thing that I knew just how he felt? Shelley left me a couple of angry, cursing messages at home, a nice counterpoint to Anne's remorseful ones. After a day or two, I started screening the messages, deleting any from Shelley or Anne as soon as I heard their voices. Shelley called Dave at work and sent him letters, but he never responded to them. Margaret was handling his divorce too, and he and I just sat back and let her run the show. To my amazement, the lawsuits against Moran and the health club were resolved first. The one against Moran never went anywhere. He disappeared one day and left no forwarding address. But the health club, eager to avoid negative publicity, just as Margaret had predicted, reached a $1.1 million settlement. I signed a pledge of confidentiality and walked away with the largest check I'd ever seen. In less than 10 weeks, my brother was a rock, and I guess I was for him too. We lived like two bachelors, going out to eat a lot, taking in a ball game from time to time, or just sitting around and talking over a few beers. We talked about Anne and Shelley, about our lives with them, about how many great women there were out there just waiting for us. It wasn't easy to believe that last bit, and yet we were really able to help each other. I could see as plain as day that there wasn't a thing wrong with Dave that led to Shelley's behavior. She was simply a selfish strumpet. Likewise, Dave reassured me that Anne's cheating wasn't a reflection on me, just an indication of how screwed up she was. Neither of us probably believed the other one all that much, but it still helped to hear it. Dave was divorced first, as it turned out. He made it clear that he wouldn't talk to Shelley under any circumstances, and so Margaret handled the whole thing. She told him that Shell had fought for more money at first, but that with the tape she didn't have a leg to stand on. I went into the office with him the day he had to sign the papers. Shelley had already signed them. He smiled grimly, shook Margaret's hand, thanked her, and then went off to the men's room. I heard him crying through the door when I went to find him. 3 weeks later, it was my turn. We met on a Tuesday, Anne, me, and the 2 lawyers. Anne's lawyer had agreed to a settlement but insisted on 2 conditions: that I drop infidelity as a reason for the divorce, and that I meet privately with Anne before we signed the papers. I told Margaret I was willing to see Anne, but not willing to drop infidelity. Eventually, we agreed that I'd give Anne a chance to persuade me. If she could do so, we'd change it to irreconcilable differences, that old standby. In a weird way, I was looking forward to hearing what Anne had to say. Maybe I'm a masochist, but I loved her for 10 years, and I couldn't really imagine simply walking away without one final conversation. When I got there, Anne was sitting in the conference room wearing a blue dress she knew I'd always loved. Her hair was shorter, and it looked great. She was pale, but she was the same beautiful woman I had loved for so long. "Okay, Anne, it's your meeting," I said neutrally. My heart was pounding, but I tried to look calm. "Just 2 things, all right? Please don't tell me how much you love me, and don't tell me it was just love-making." She flushed, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. "Will, I'm so sorry, but how can I not say those things? I screwed up, plain and simple. I was selfish and thoughtless, and I hurt you. But it was just love-making. Nothing but a stupid, stupid impulse I gave into. You can't imagine how much I've gone over it and over it, how many times I wished I'd never done it." "Yes, well, but you did do it, didn't you?" I had no intention of making this easy for her. Just being in the same room with her, knowing that we were about to separate for good and why, broke my heart all over again. I went to the window and gazed out, unwilling to let her see my stricken face. Behind me, I could hear her crying softly. "Baby, it didn't mean anything. You know it was the dumbest, most hurtful thing I could ever have done to you. I know that, but it meant nothing to me. It has nothing to do with how much I love you." I let her talk a bit more, listening to the pleading tone, the sweet voice I had always loved, but not hearing a single word that I couldn't have predicted. She had nothing to say to me that I didn't already know, and nothing that made a damn bit of difference. After a while, I turned around and came back to the table, sitting down directly across from her. "And just so you know, I still love you very much, but it's over between us." She started to cry again. "You took from me, from us, the most precious thing we had together, aside from our love, the bond of trust between us. How could I ever make love to you again, wondering if it was me you were thinking about or Moran and his freak show tool? How would I know whether you were loving me or missing him? And how could I live with you, wondering where you were every time you were 10 minutes late coming home, wondering what you were doing on your lunch hour, wondering whether you'd found another big tool to play around with?" I waited, but she had no reply to make. Finally, between the sobs, she said, "Please, baby, please, couldn't you give me one more chance? And I'll give you a few minutes to think about this one. What if I had met some bimbo with fantastic big jugs and started bawling her on the side for a few weeks? Nobody I liked or respected, just a handsome girl who was a fantastic lay, who gave me a degree of pure physical pleasure that I never got from you. And then you found out about it. Could you stay with me? Could you get past the feelings of hurt, the sense of total betrayal? Could you overcome the doubts you'd have about your own attractiveness, the fears that you weren't ever going to be the one I really wanted?" She looked up at me with the saddest eyes I had ever seen. "Will, I don't have to think about it. I've thought about it for weeks now. Could I forgive you? Could I take you back if it were the other way around?" And the answer is no, I couldn't. I just couldn't handle those feelings. I know that. So I'm asking you to do something I couldn't do, to be a braver, stronger person than I could ever be, and to give me a chance to make it up to you. A lifetime to show you how sorry I am and how much I love you. There was silence, a minute, 2 minutes. As we looked at one another, both of us thinking about all we had meant to one another and how we had arrived at this point. I stood up slowly, hating myself and hating her for cheating on me, and now for throwing it all back on me. I don't know whether I can't do it or won't do it, but I'm not that braver, stronger person you want me to be. Goodbye. And I waited by the open door for a moment, looking back, giving her a chance for the last word. She had her head down, crying. She didn't say anything else. Margaret was waiting for me down the hall, a surprisingly sympathetic look on her hard face. Let her have irreconcilable differences, I growled. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference to me. Dave and I sat at my kitchen table. We'd had a few, but we weren't drunk. Listen, I said, I've made some plans. He nodded, and I went on. After the lawyer fees, I still have nearly $800,000 from that settlement. I've invested all but $50,000 of it in some nice safe places, so there will be a lovely nest egg for when we're old and feeble. But the last 50 grand has been designated to the Will and Dave Harris Recovery Fund, and we're going to start spending some of it. I've rented us 4 weeks at a 2-bedroom condo in Cancun, starting 2 weeks from now. Go tell your office you're taking some time off. We are going to be a pair of fun-loving bachelors, 2 gay divorces, if you know what I mean. He just raised an eyebrow, and I laughed. No, a whole, gay as in cheerful. We've done enough moping around, telling each other how badly we've been screwed over. Cancun was a blast, or at least as much of one as it can be for 2 guys recovering from broken hearts. We got a lot of sun, played a lot of tennis, swam a lot, and drank a lot, though we kept one another from going off the deep end. With each passing day, we got tanner, a little fitter, and slightly further from the nightmare we'd just lived through. And let me say, God bless my charismatic and charming brother. Despite the blow to his self-confidence that Shelley had laid on him, he got his old groove back, and we had a lot of female companionship. His favorite stunt, and damned if it didn't succeed 75% of the time, was to spot 2 attractive women sitting together. He dragged me straight over to their table, smiled winningly, and said, "Pardon me, ladies. I'm sure you wouldn't be comfortable letting a stranger buy you a drink, so let me introduce my brother, Will Harris." Then it was up to me, the shyer one, to say, "Delighted to meet you both. This is my brother, Dave Harris." Then he would step back and, "Phew, glad that's taken care of. Now may we buy you a drink?" By this time, the women were usually at least grinning, if not laughing. And we'd mostly find ourselves with female companionship for the evening. Sometimes the companionship lasted until breakfast. After all, unattached women in Cancun were as eager for fun as we were. I had maybe 6 different women in my bed over those 4 weeks, and I imagine Dave's number was a little higher. Mostly it was fun, just laughter and pleasure and keeping it light. The first couple of times I made love to a woman, I was tentative, distracted by thoughts of Moran and his huge tool. Even though both he and Anne were thousands of miles away. It was hard to compete with what I knew he had done to her. But the women didn't seem to notice, and being with someone new got easier each time. One-night stands may not be for everyone, or for every stage in a person's life, but they seemed to be what Dave and I needed. Only one of the women was different, Shannon, a tall Irish redhead a year younger than I was. We did all the same things, had some drinks, laughed a lot, went for dinner, did some dancing, and back to my place, to bed. She was handsome and responsive, as eager to be with me as I was to be with her. We had a lot of fun. When it got different was later, around 3 a.m. For some reason I woke up and just lay in bed, Shannon softly breathing in sleep beside me. Thoughts of Anne filled my head, Anne and all that we had had together, and how it had been taken from me. I started crying, very quietly, and before I knew it, Shannon was kneeling beside me, holding me in her arms, saying, "Let it out, baby, it's okay." I was embarrassed, but I couldn't stop. She kept soothing me, and finally, in response to her urgings, I told her the whole story. By the time I was done, the sun was rising. We shuffled into the kitchen, and I made breakfast for us while she told me her own story. Also a divorce, no cheating, just a husband who grew ever more distant, ever more driven and career-oriented, until there was just no marriage left. She'd been on her own for nearly 2 years. After eating, we found our way back to the bedroom without a word spoken and made love. The night before had been screwing, fun, exciting, friendly, but just love-making. This time, we looked into each other's eyes, murmured tenderly, and found a very different level of closeness. My one-night stand with Shannon turned into 4 wonderful nights. In the afternoon, she left. My brother Dave was a little worried about me, I think, urging me to meet new ladies. He mentioned it was time to move on. I acknowledged that Shannon was special. He agreed, saying he liked her too. However, he reminded me that she had gone home, and we still had 10 more days to spend down here. He dragged me off to the tennis court, then the pool, and by that evening we were chatting with 2 secretaries from San Francisco on their very first trip outside the United States. That night, they slept in their own hotel room, but the next afternoon, Barbara joined me in my room for her first ever experience on foreign soil. Dave and I went out for dinner at a steak place we both liked. It had been 8 months since Cancun. Dave had long since found a terrific apartment he liked, but we still spent a lot of time together. Just after we ordered, Dave leaned forward and mentioned quietly that across the room, two couples had just sat down, and one of them was Anne, with some guy. I appreciated the warning, and despite my sudden thumping heart, I waited a few seconds before casually turning around to look across the dance floor. She had already spotted us and was looking steadily over at me. I gave her a friendly, non-committal smile and a wave, and she smiled back. Then I forced myself to turn around and chat some more with my brother. He inquired if this was the first time I had seen her since the divorce, and I nodded. I admitted that I didn't think I'd have this much of a reaction, but the surprise had something to do with it. I suggested to Dave that he do me a favor. Let's enjoy our dinner and not tell me anything about what she's doing over there, how she looks. I don't want to know. Dave agreed, saying that it's fine, and then he launched into a funny story about a CO worker who had been flirting with him for a couple of weeks. While he wasn't terribly interested in her, he was enjoying the game. While enjoying our coffees and casually observing the dancing couples, I felt a hand on my shoulder and heard that familiar voice inquiring about my well-being. Rising from my seat, I gazed into Anne's eyes and offered a greeting, once again caught off guard. She suggested a dance for old time's sake, and I agreed willingly. As we danced, memories flooded back, her warmth in my arms, her beauty, and the nostalgia for happier times. Amidst discussing mundane topics like our jobs and the weather, we eventually lapsed into silence, lost in the emotions of holding her again. I reflected on the dances we shared and the realization that those moments were now memories. Towards the end of the dance, Anne pulled back to look into my eyes and inquired about my well-being. Despite not owing her any honesty, I decided to share my feelings. I expressed that I was all right, pretty good, I guessed. Some days were better than others. Seeing her that night, dancing together, was powerful, and I didn't know I would feel this much. Anne, with a serious expression, confessed that she wasn't so all right. She missed me every day, and being in my arms again had a profound effect on her. Unsure of how to respond, I remained silent as the music played its last chords. Anne hesitated to let me go and shared. A thought, had I ever wondered if I made the right decision? She admitted that she still thought about us all the time, but usually didn't get much past wondering why I made the wrong decision. Later, when I dropped Dave off, he expressed concern about my well-being. I reassured him, acknowledging the inevitability of such encounters in a small town. Confirming our tennis plans for the next day, I headed home. In the dim bedroom, as I undressed quietly, Shannon rolled over towards me and inquired about my evening with Dave. I shared the strangeness of the encounter, contemplating that it might have been for the best that she hadn't joined. She responded with a loving smile, proposing that I hold her for a few minutes. Embracing, I felt her tender kisses along the side of my neck, savoring her familiar scent.
Story 2.
Undoubtedly, my hobby bench was the thing I'd missed the most. It served as my sanctuary, a place for soul healing. There was nothing wrong with my soul, it's just an interesting way to convey a degree of unhappiness. Somewhere along the line, things fell apart, and there's no specific time I can pinpoint because it happened gradually. I'm quite handy around the house, capable of fixing almost anything. I dislike calling a repairman for a simple task, and paying him almost a whole day's wages for a few hours of subpar work. Anyway, what I can't fix is my marriage. To explain, it's like a fine piece of china. You can glue a broken plate back together, but it's never like the original. Once a marriage is broken, it can be repaired, but never restored to its original condition. I didn't want a patched-up broken plate. After 18 years of marriage, my wife Tracy decided to explore relationships with other men, at least one that I know of. By the time I found out, it was too late to prevent the breakage. Slow in recognizing relationship issues, I assumed everything was fine. We married right after high school, had a daughter named Carly immediately, and complications meant we couldn't have more, but we were content. My job as an auto body man paid well, but there was no real future to it. I could open my shop, but I never desired business ownership. Things were fine as long as the money was adequate. Tracy spent the evening taking night classes at the local community college, a bit more ambitious than I. Actually, a lot more ambitious. When Carly started school, Tracy began working, improving our family life with the extra money. With 2 incomes, we scraped up enough to buy a small house in a nice neighborhood. There was never a desire for a bigger or better place. For years, Tracy didn't waste money on frivolous things, dressing and grooming well while watching expenses. My wardrobe expenses were usually limited to jeans and flannel shirts. She cleaned up well, but I always looked a bit unkempt with my bushy eyebrows and long hair in a ponytail. Not a wannabe hippie or biker, I just liked my hair that way. No one teased me. I had enough body build to intimidate them if necessary. The downside to my grooming habits was Tracy's occasional embarrassment when we went out. She never said anything, but I always felt it. As Carly grew, Tracy spent more time at work, becoming an expert in insurance claims. She enjoyed her work, bringing home more money than me without comment. By Carly's high school years, Tracy evolved into a sophisticated businesswoman, spending more on clothing as her status grew. Frequent trips to the beauty salon and nights at the gym transformed her into an attractive woman, while I remained a grungy, hairy embarrassment. The next step in our marriage's progression was inevitable. Over the years, my relationship with Carly grew stronger. I spent more time with her than her mother, and we developed a bond. Tracy was either at work or working at home. Family time decreased as fast as Tracy's career increased. Our personal time also dwindled. She was always too tired, and I sensed I was no longer the man she once dreamed of spending her life with. I grew up in a public housing project. My mother, a single parent, raised my brother Robert and me by working as a waitress. It was tough for her, and we didn't make it any easier. Constantly in trouble, as that was the nature of life in the projects, many of my character traits carried into my marriage. I was rash and quick-tempered, which landed me in juvenile hall a few too many times. Tracy was aware of the problem, but since we were married, I had kept it under control and actually became a little placid. As Tracy and I drifted apart, I sought solace in my basement hobby shop, a dank little hole. Distressed about my failing marriage, I didn't know what to do. Despite trying the usual things like flowers and gifts, weekly expensive dinners, and good wine, nothing worked. In despair, I retreated into my little haven at every opportunity. Carly remained the bright spot in my life, but I felt I was letting her down. I viewed myself as a defective father and husband. Were these feelings self-induced, or did Tracy impose them on me? She loved me. She would never do that. To divert my mind from my shortcomings, I spent hours creating electronic doodads, simple gadgets available anywhere. My first project, a fake video surveillance camera, was fun to make, although it served no real purpose. As I gained experience, my projects became more elaborate, yet I never advanced beyond being a mere tinkerer. During weekends, Carly and I frequented yard sales and flea markets. She acquired retro clothes, while I collected old electronic and remote control toys. Tracy stayed at home. 2 months ago, I sensed Tracy was cheating. It didn't take me long to verify it. She was visiting Todd Wick, a co-worker, at his apartment every Tuesday and Thursday for 2-hour lunches. Tracy hadn't made much effort to conceal the relationship. I didn't know if she felt complacent or just didn't give a damn. The plate was broken, irreparable. At this point, I decided that something had to be done. I spent the whole day preparing for my departure. Carly was starting college in 3 weeks, and everything was paid up for the first 2 semesters. Although I'd miss her, I felt it was time to cut the apron strings. I took half of the savings account, unconcerned about other financial matters. I just needed enough to get away and get started over. Filing for divorce appeared overly intricate and futile in my view. Instead, I had my attorney create a power of attorney for Tracy to sell the house. Papers were also prepared to sue Todd Whitcomb and Continental Memorial Insurance, although my expectations were low due to their shared workplace. Despite this, the lawyer was willing to attempt anything for a potential percentage. I instructed him to proceed. The majority of the evening was spent working on my modified alarm keychain, which was no longer just a keychain but now boasted a surprisingly loud alarm for its size. To achieve this, I upgraded the battery to 9 volts for increased volume and duration. I configured it for remote activation and ensured it couldn't be turned off. The device, encased in a 3-inch PVC plastic with 20 drilled holes, had a small antenna wire protruding. After completion, I affixed 2 PVC caps on each end and painted it flat black with barbecue paint, though the reason for the paint choice was unclear. If everything went as planned, the only way to stop it would be to drop it into water. Attempts to make it watertight muted the sound, so I left it as is. Tracy had been in bed for a while, making it easy for me to slip the gadget into her purse, lining through a small hole in one of the side pockets. I estimated it would take at least 5 minutes for someone to locate and extract it from the bottom of the purse, which was sufficient for my purpose of provoking irritation before my departure. After carefully checking my work, I spent the next few hours loading desired items into my truck, picking up my body shop tools, and final check that afternoon. Clothing retrieval could wait until morning. With everything ready after Tracy left for work, I spent the night on the sofa. My wife, dressed for work, inquired about my morning plans. I explained that I got tied up with a project the previous night and was catching a few hours of sleep. She asked if I would eat anything, and I replied that I would just have coffee and an English muffin. Before leaving, she reminded me to rinse my dishes. As she pulled out of the driveway, I couldn't help but notice how good she looked. Was I going to miss her? At least for a while. I grabbed some trash bags and headed for the bedroom, intending to collect the clothing I needed or wanted. Suddenly, my daughter Carly confronted me, questioning my actions. I responded, asking why she wasn't at school, and she revealed that she already met all her curriculum requirements. She insisted that I answer her question. I placed the bags on the floor and looked at Carly, offering her coffee. As we walked into the kitchen, she managed a small laugh and asked if I had figured out that Mom was cheating on me. I acted cool and asked, "Figured what out?" Carly revealed that she found out about 2 months ago and expressed frustration that I hadn't done anything sooner. I explained that I only recently discovered the situation and was planning to leave. Carly pressed me for details and asked if I had talked to Mom. I admitted that I hadn't and questioned if she had. Carly explained that she confronted Mom about 2 months ago, but Mom provided no satisfactory explanation. It seemed like Mom wanted to get caught. We sat quietly for a few moments, contemplating the situation. I revealed that I didn't know where I would be going, while Carly shared her plans for college. I assured her that I had taken care of everything I could ahead of time. Carly asked about my boat and belongings. I mentioned my friend Felix from the project and how he would help me with a few things, including taking care of my boat. As I put the cups in the sink, I realized I never made that English muffin. Carly asked about the boat again, and when she realized I was giving it to Felix, she smiled. In that moment, I couldn't help but feel a deep appreciation for my daughter. 20 minutes later, I was hooking the boat up to the truck. When I got the boat, I was hoping that it was something that the family could enjoy together. Unfortunately, it was not Tracy's cup of tea. She hated the boat and the water. Carly and I went by ourselves a few times, but it wasn't the same after that. The boat just sat by the garage. I would not miss it. I had a few firearms and a deer rifle that my dad gave me before he moved to Florida. Felix would get more use out of them than I would, even though he didn't hunt. I piled all of my snap-on and power tools into the back of the boat. Mr. Handyman had retired. Felix was barely awake when I got to his place. He had 2 mixed-breed girls living with him, but it became quickly evident that they were not morning people. Felix got us a couple of early morning beers, and the girls went back to bed. When I was 15, Felix and I broke into a golf course maintenance shed. The sprinkler system for all 18 holes was old and had been done in copper. The maintenance shed had been full of copper fittings necessary to maintain the system. I decided that a lot of money could be made by reselling the copper, and Felix was more than eager to join with me. Needless to say, we got caught. Or at least I did. Felix got away. The cops knew that there were 2 of us, but I always insisted that it was only me. I got 2 years probation for being dumb, but made a lifelong friend because I kept my mouth shut. Felix was as white as I was, but insisted on talking as if he were from the ghetto instead of the projects. There was not much difference, but Felix had to get by in a different environment than I did. He adapted to his world, and I couldn't fault him for that. Felix questioned me about dragging the boat around and asked if we were going fishing. I explained that it was a present for my best buddy, and he jokingly claimed to be my only friend. I then told Felix that I was leaving town for a while and needed him to take care of my belongings. I slid the boat and trailer title across the kitchen table, and Felix laughed, thinking I was joking. However, I assured him it was a trade. I needed him to do something for me in return. Felix, eager to help, asked if I wanted someone passed away, but I clarified that I just wanted the person to spend some time in the emergency room or recovery ward. I emphasized not to kill him, only to hurt him. Felix's smile grew, and I explained that I wanted this to happen every 6 weeks for 6 months, or until the person left town. Curious about the reason, Felix asked if the person took Tracy from me. He immediately regretted his words, apologized, and fetched 2 more beers from the fridge. I handed Felix a 3x5 card with the name, address, and license number of Todd Wickham, and I asked him to wait a couple of weeks before taking any action. He looked at the card and nodded toward the door. The power tools and weapons were gravy that he had not expected. He took them inside the house while I unhooked the boat. We talked for a few more minutes and then parted ways. I could trust Felix. A year ago I would have said that there were 2 people that I trusted. Now there was just Felix. It was Tuesday. Tracy and Todd walked out of the company building and got into his Lexus at 11 right on the dot. Since I knew where they were going, I had no trouble following them. Todd's apartment. There was nothing lovey-dovey going on as they were just acting like a married couple. I gave them 15 minutes to get settled in and then hit the button on the remote control. Nothing occurred. The darn thing didn't function. What the heck did I do wrong? I exited the truck and approached the apartment building, pressing the button once more. Still, no response. While contemplating my next move, I opted to deflate Todd's tires in desperation. I might as well be productive. I only targeted the 2 tires on the side away from the building. In a last-ditch effort, I walked right up to the side of the building and tried again. It finally worked. I was outside of the apartment building and the noise was loud and clear. The sound inside had to be extremely loud. It blared for about a second, paused for 2 seconds, and then repeated. Everyone in the apartment complex was now being entertained by my little gadget. I grinned as I walked back to the truck. Halfway down the block, I could still hear the beeping. Things were progressing better than anticipated. My lawyer was having the lawsuit papers delivered to Todd and the company at 2 o'clock. I would be gone by then. Carly was waiting for me when I got home. She handed me a card with her college address and her cell phone number, which I already had. She had a few extra things for me to take that I had missed, and even packed me a lunch so that I wouldn't have to stop until I got out of the state. She actually explained that when she gave it to me. We both had a good laugh and a hug. I left the power of attorney and my wedding ring on the kitchen table. Carly stated that she would be more than happy to explain things to her mother. My body shop tools were in the back of the truck under the bed cover. My personal stuff was jammed behind the seat in the cab. As I pulled away from the house for the last time, my cell phone rang. It was Tracy. I turned the phone off. It would have been interesting to hear what she had to say, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. Interstate 81 South was the best escape route. I didn't stop until I hit Chattanooga. It was a sleazy motel, but there was a bar next door. Big mistake. I drank way too much, and then discovered that while I was sleeping it off, 1 or more of the local boys borrowed all of my body shop tools. The back of the truck was picked clean, but they didn't touch anything in the cab. I don't know if that was because of integrity, or maybe they just couldn't carry anymore. I showered, shaved, and put on fresh clothes. After a much-needed breakfast at the local Waffle House, I hit the road for Nashville. I was kicking myself for being so damn dumb and trying to figure out what to do next without tools. I wasn't even going to try and get a body shop job. I settled in at one of the Crystals in the area and started going through the help wanted ads. Most of the jobs were commission sales or minimum wage jobs. The ones that fell into normal categories I wasn't qualified for until I hit a small 3-line ad. Wanted auto damage appraiser, must have body shop experience. Conrad Insurance Company. I turned my cell phone on, called the listed number, and I got a name, address, and appointment in 1 hour. I deleted the 5 calls that came from Tracy. I punched the address into the GPS and headed right over. I always like to be early. I had never gone on a job interview before and realized that I was not dressed for one. It was too late now. What they see is what they get. There were 3 other guys there when I arrived. They were all well-dressed and looking good. Each of them had a folder in his hand, which I assumed was a resume. Each one entered the manager's office, stayed 5 minutes, and left. They didn't look happy. I was feeling pretty good because I didn't think that I could do worse than they did. The guy behind the desk was dressed well, but the clothes didn't fit the man. He was hard, with cracked skin and faded tats sticking out around different parts of his clothes. His hands were the things that I noticed most. They were calloused and gnarly, just like mine. This guy wasn't an executive. He was a metal beater wearing people clothes. He noticed me smiling and sort of smiled back. It didn't take him long to read over the interview form that I had filled out in the lobby. I believe I left half of the spaces empty. It wasn't a smart-ass move. I simply lacked the information to fill them. Hemingway, Daniel Hemingway. I clarified to him that no, I am not related to the famous author. He seemed relieved and expressed that he wouldn't want intellectuals hanging around the office. Grady Burgess, the man I was talking to, introduced himself and inquired about my presence. I made it clear that I wouldn't try to con him, having witnessed others being excused for attempting to give him any nonsense. I explained that I got drunk the night before in Chattanooga, and all my shop gear was stolen from my truck while I slept it off. I mentioned it's hard to get a shop job without the necessary gear, so this seemed like a good alternative. Grady seemed to understand, but he sensed there might be more to the story. I admitted that my judgment was clouded due to finding out about my wife cheating on me after 18 years of marriage. Grady asked about my wife's current location, and I replied that she was in Pennsylvania. He called Marcy, a woman in her mid-40s, to bring us 2 coffees. She set down 2 plain white ceramic cups without cream or sugar. Grady, with a loud voice, instructed her to cancel the rest of the appointments, indicating that they found what they were looking for. Marcy gave Grady a scowl and then gave me a little wink. I was looking a little sheepish when I noticed that Grady was smiling at my embarrassment. We chatted for about 2 hours, and then he carefully explained to me what the job entailed as well as the pay and benefits. The only downside to the whole deal were the image requirements. 80% of my job was going to involve contact with customers. Image was paramount. That meant a haircut and a complete change in grooming habits. I was expected to get a new wardrobe and a shoe shine kit. He emphasized that Marcy would personally help me with everything that needed to be done. I was expected to be in Atlanta by Monday morning for a full week of training. Conrad Insurance was an independent company, but worked as a subcontractor for several larger national auto insurers. Everything had to be done to specific standards. The company paid all the expenses related to the training, but the clothes and grooming were coming out of my pocket. Marcy seemed to enjoy the rest of the week more than I did. I was a little project for her. I insisted on going to a barbershop rather than a hairdresser's, but she made all of the rest of the decisions. Not only did I get a haircut, but I also got my eyebrows and ears trimmed, and my nose hairs pruned. Marcy informed the barber that I would be back every 10 days for the same treatment. My working clothes were pretty generic, khaki pants and white shirts. She even found a jacket that went with the pants. I also got 2 pairs of black steel toe dress shoes with a dozen pairs of black socks. She had found a small studio apartment for me and helped me get it set up. Friday morning, I got my Tennessee driver's license, and that afternoon, Marcy gave me the keys to my company car and a laptop computer before leaving me at the apartment that evening. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed me on the cheek. She expressed admiration, saying that if Grady wasn't so jealous, she'd have to jump my bones. While flattered, the thought of her suggestion made me shiver a little. It was time to give Carly a call. I spoke with Carly and shared that I had been hired for a desk job doing appraisals out in the field. I explained it was the first place I applied to, and I seemed to be in the right place at the right time. Carly asked about home, and I mentioned that I was fine, but Mom was a wreck. Carly was surprised, expecting Mom to be happy to see me gone. I noted that it seemed like Mom had a plan, but I messed it up somehow. Carly shared that Mom spent the first day sitting at the kitchen table, chanting, and being unresponsive when questioned. I apologized for messing up Mom's plans, and Carly speculated that Mom was anticipating some type of confrontation, but hadn't counted on my sudden departure. We both agreed it was unexpected, and I apologized again. Changing the subject, I asked Carly about her plans. She planned to leave for school as soon as Mom settled down a little, hoping to pick up a few summer session classes. I shared that I was leaving for Atlanta the next morning and promised to call her when I got back. Carly expressed that she was glad things were working out for me and believed Mom would break out of her slump soon. The training classes in Atlanta were a snap. It was mostly about putting the right information in the right block. The hardest part was overcoming my weak computer skills. I had no trouble getting a few of the young female trainees to tutor me, but found it difficult to resist their charms. They seemed disappointed in my reserve. The next 2 years flew by. Grady was quite pleased with my job performance and was generous with the raises and bonuses. I talked with Carly on a regular basis. She was doing fine in all her classes and with her social life. It was nice to see that she was dating, but as a father, I was a little anxious about the whole scene. She laughed at my concern. I never heard from Tracy. There had not appeared to be any attempt on her part to contact me. I was not hiding, so if she had wanted to find me, it would not have been a problem. She sold the house and prepaid Carly's tuition with the proceeds. Then she left town. Tracy called Carly every few weeks, but the relationship between them never returned to what it was before the incident. I had to give Tracy points for trying. Carly had no idea where she had relocated to and never asked. Tracy never filed for divorce. I could hold out for as long as she could. My social life was another matter. I never thought of myself as a lady executor, but I discovered that a new persona came along with my upgraded appearance and marital freedom. I was technically still married, but under the circumstances, I didn't feel that way. Nashville was full of young ladies looking for companionship. I always made sure that they knew that I was married and not looking for any type of relationship. That turned out to be a big plus with most of them, including a few who were married themselves. I was careful not to date any of the married ones more than once and never took them back to my apartment. It didn't matter too much with the single ones, as long as they knew that I wasn't husband material. Grady had hired 2 more guys to do what I did. I got to train them and supervise them. There was plenty of work to go around, but I got the feeling that something was in the wind. Grady approached me, expressing that we needed to talk. Despite his seriousness, what bothered me more were the words he used, the dreaded phrase wives often used when springing bad news on unsuspecting husbands. Grady chuckled at my groan. He assured me not to get too excited, mentioning it wasn't all that bad. We both laughed, but then he dropped the bomb. He said, "Daniel, I hate to say it, but you have outgrown the job." I was puzzled and asked, "What the hell does that mean?" Grady explained that I could do better than my current position, and although he had no complaints, he believed I should be thinking about moving on. Feeling a bit defensive, I asked if he was firing me, but he adamantly denied it. Instead, he clarified that he was trying to encourage me to move forward. Marcy came in with 2 cups of coffee, unasked. She leaned over and whispered in my ear, loud enough for Grady to hear, mentioning that Grady was afraid I might steal her away. She assured me not to worry, and added that if he let me go, she would go with me. Grady groaned as Marcy left the office, and the idea of her giggling lingered, sending a shiver down my spine. Grady then informed me about a job interview set up for me in Houston on Friday. American Consolidated Claims needed someone to run their national operation, specifically the appraisal section, and Grady had already spoken to them about me. I questioned why they wouldn't hire young, qualified college graduates, and Grady explained they had tried that 3 times without success. Curious about his motive, I asked, "What's in it for you? I don't understand." He revealed, "In about 4 years, Marcy and I are going to be moving to Gulf Shores. ACC has agreed to buy the business when I am ready to sell." I understood that he was not doing this out of the goodness of his heart, but using me as part of a trade. He admitted, "Exactly. See, I always said you were smart." We both enjoyed another laugh at his devious but transparent attempt to take advantage of me. Thursday night, I was on my way to Houston. I didn't want to relocate, but everything that Grady said made sense. I could have flown to Houston, but decided to drive instead. American Consolidated had 3 floors in an enormous office building. They were expecting me, and I was not the least bit nervous. I knew that I was capable of doing the job, and I was ready and willing to attack anyone who dared to question my academic qualifications. Knowing that their MBA employees had flubbed the job previously gave me confidence. The first 2 interviews went great. During the 3rd one of the yuppie middle managers started to ask about my formal business training and was immediately shut down by his boss. I smiled at the support, but was upset at the same time. I spent the last hour with the human resources director. We were discussing salary and benefits, as if my acceptance was a foregone conclusion. To be honest, at that point it was. It would be difficult not to take this job. It was lunchtime, and my host was anxious to show off the company cafeteria. The floor that we were on was as big as a basketball court. Field offices lined the perimeter, and cubicles dotted most of the center. My host expressed optimism about me enjoying working there. I reciprocated, stating that I believed American Consolidated Claims looked like a top-notch organization. I mentioned the potential occasional confusion with 2 department heads named Hemingway and clarified that I had no relatives in Houston. Unexpectedly, She brought up a distant relative named Tracy, catching me off guard. While walking, I noticed Tracy across the room. Despite her different hairstyle, she looked radiant, talking with a small group of employees. I couldn't help but stare at her as if hypnotized, and I accidentally stumbled into a mail cart, causing a small disturbance. Tracy noticed me, looking a bit surprised, and I took advantage of her confusion to quickly leave the floor. When asked if something was wrong, I explained that I wasn't paying attention and was admiring the layout of the operation. The elevator ride felt like it took forever. As we reached the cafeteria entrance, I thanked Miss Thurgood for her help and expressed my regrets about declining the offer. It was an unexpected move, and she stood with her mouth open as I quietly exited the floor and the building. I acknowledged that it was a great job and recognized that I might regret turning it down at some point. However, at that moment, being close to Tracy on a regular basis would cause more pain than I was willing to endure. I wondered why Tracy hadn't filed for divorce yet and hoped she would take her maiden name back when she finally did. Grady was going to be pissed. I'll handle that when I get home. 12 hours later, I was back home. Interestingly enough, Grady was more apologetic than angry. He expressed regret, saying, "Sorry, Daniel. I had no idea that your ex was working at ACC." I sat across from his desk and smiled as Marcy sat down, bringing 2 cups of coffee. I reassured Grady, stating that there was no way he could have known, and it wasn't anybody's fault. I admitted, if I had any balls, I would have just taken the job and faced her. As you can see, that didn't happen. Grady responded, "That doesn't make you less of a man, Daniel. There is no way that you could come out a winner under those circumstances. I probably would have done the same thing. I am sorry if I screwed up your deal with them." Grady laughed a little, setting down his cup. "No problem, Daniel. They still want it, and the deal is still on." Things continued as they were for the next few years. Carly graduated from college and married a nice fellow from Cleveland. I managed to attend the wedding in time to give her away, but did not stay. Tracy was there, looking beautiful. It was extremely difficult to avoid her, but I did. Carly was disappointed that I did not stay for the complete day, but she said that she understood and was glad that I showed up. I was happy that Tracy got to see her only daughter get married, and I started filling my spare time taking college classes. It made more sense than going to bars and picking up floozies. Most of the other night school students were older, and a few of the ladies were able and willing to fill in for the missing bar girls. Grady was happy to foot the bill for the classes. Eventually, it came time for Grady to retire, and all the terms of the sale had been finalized. Since I had expressed my reluctance to stay with ACC, Grady arranged an interview for me with a Chicago firm. Despite my reservations about going there, Grady explained that the employment package was fabulous, which seemed unusual given the competitive job market. Upon arriving at the Universal Amalgamated Insurance Building, I was taken to the 18th floor and saw the name on the door, Emmett Peak. To my surprise, the executive from ACC who had defended my qualifications during my interview there was there. The first 30 minutes went extremely well, but then things turned sour. Mr. Peak expressed disappointment over my sudden departure after our talk in Houston and mentioned being somewhat understanding after learning the circumstances. I apologized for running off and explained that I wasn't ready to face the alternatives that would have come with the job. Mr. Peak then questioned whether I had figured out a way to handle difficult situations better. He mentioned setting up another interview for me and asked a seemingly unrelated question about a small glass dome on Tracy Hemingway's desk at ACC. His question about Tracy worried me, and I wondered how she related to this interview. He inquired about the purpose of the black object inside the dome, revealing Tracy's relocation to Chicago. Mr. Peak expressed the value he placed on Tracy and his intention to keep her on the team, urging me to compliment her. Feeling trapped, I explained that the black doodad was a small item I made for my wife before we separated, unsure why she kept it. Mr. Peak asked about its purpose, and I decided to end the interview, stating that he would need to get that information from Tracy. I stood up, unnerving Mr. Peak, who seemed desperate and talked faster as he steered me to Tracy's office. On her door was just her name, no title or position description. As I walked in, Peak continued talking, and I noticed Tracy at her desk, older but more beautiful than I remembered. Over the years, I found myself dwelling on the bad things she had done, and my image of her deteriorated as my hate grew. However, the fact that I still thought about her often indicated that deep down, I still loved her. I hated what she had done, but I never stopped loving her. As this turmoil filled my brain, I realized that I was standing there, shaking my head slowly from side to side. It felt like I was trying to con myself. Her voice pulled me out of my reverie. "Daniel, nobody told me that you were coming. What are you doing here?" She started to get up, but I motioned her to stay seated. I sat across from her, not knowing how to start the conversation. "You look good, Daniel. You look even better than you did when I saw you in Houston." This was not the discussion I was anticipating. How was I supposed to react to that? There was no way that I was going to compliment her on her hair or dress. It was a game that I was not willing to play. Mr. Peak asked me here today so that I could explain what the doodad, as he calls it, is on your desk. Her hand instinctively went towards the glass dome, but then stopped. "That's crap, Daniel, and we both know it. He offered me a job again. He was disappointed when you turned him down in Houston." I didn't respond. I just sat. I had no idea where this conversation was going to go. "I want to talk to you, but you were gone before I could catch you." "Why would you want to do that?" "At the time, I was still hoping that I could explain things to you. Now I know that there was nothing to explain. It was all pretty well out in the open. I found myself regretting coming to see her. I pondered how to leave without seeming like a total fool. Why should I care?" She asked if I ever wanted an explanation. There was one thing that piqued my curiosity in her look, inviting me to continue. She inquired why I kept the little alarm. I explained that it reminded me of how stupid I was, looking at it and knowing that one mistake could ruin a whole lifetime. When I mentioned she only slept with him one time, she clarified that it was not what she meant. I asked Tracy before I left if she could provide me with a reason that wouldn't sound like a tired old cliché. She responded that she probably couldn't. Reminding her that she gave an explanation to Carly, she admitted that it was before it was too late. Curious, I asked what that meant. She explained that at the time Carly confronted her, nothing had happened, and she just sat and looked at Carly. The conversation was not going the way I wanted it to go. Somehow or other, I was going to have to listen to her tell me about what happened and why. I didn't want to know if she was going to insist. I was going to demand the Reader's Digest version. I didn't want all the details. She went on to reveal that up until about 6 weeks before I left, all Todd and she did was spend time together. They had lunch and saw a few movies. Todd knew what she was doing and agreed to help her. None of this was his fault. In confusion, I asked what the hell she was talking about. She clarified that it was a plan, Daniel. It was a plan that she set up to make me jealous. Well, not to actually make me jealous, but to make me pay attention. Perplexed, I asked again what she was talking about. She explained that she was buying me flowers and things, going out to eat regularly, doing everything she thought I wanted her to do. I was telling her it was all her fault, which wasn't what she was looking for. I sat without speaking. She mentioned that it was never my fault and that she hadn't thought about it until after I left. She realized what she had done and how wrong she was. Tracy was babbling. I questioned, asking what the hell she was talking about. She decided to start at the beginning, mentioning when Todd started at the company, she immediately noticed him. He was well-dressed, well-groomed, and well-mannered, everything that I was not. I asked if that was when she decided she wanted him. She clarified that it was when she decided she wanted me to be like he was. It was always me, not him. She wanted me to look like him and act like him, just like I do now. I questioned, "Okay, then what happened?" She explained that she knew it was bad in a marriage for one spouse to try to change the other. A good marriage depended on each partner accepting the other as they were. If she tried to change me, the marriage might go to hell. But if I decided to change myself, it would be okay. I remarked, "Okay, that is the first thing you said that makes sense." She continued, sharing that when she started to openly spend time with Todd, it was so that I would notice. Either I would confront her about it, or figure it out for myself and take action. I questioned, "Take action? What does that mean?" She clarified, hoping that I would get a haircut, a regular one like I have now, hoping that I would start dressing better and being a little more attentive. It never worked, and she never knew. She acknowledged that Carly figured it out and confronted her. Carly didn't know why, but she did know what she was doing. Todd and she still had not had lovemaking, so she didn't feel really guilty. But she was a little annoyed that Carly questioned her. She admitted she was wrong. She confessed to screwing up with her husband and her daughter. I asked if she had lovemaking with him, and she admitted yes. It wasn't his fault, it was hers. She knew it took two people, and he could have stopped it, but he didn't. I sat silent, not knowing what to say, having no more questions at the moment. About 2 weeks after Carly confronted her, Todd and she were alone at his apartment, drinking wine, which she acknowledged was bad for her. She was feeling miserable that I hadn't figured it out yet. One thing led to another, and they ended up in bed. Drunken lovemaking isn't very good, but it is lovemaking. They avoided each other for 2 weeks after that. She was a real mess at home, blaming what happened on me. I could have stopped it if I cared. She had lovemaking with another man because her husband didn't care about her. It was stupid, but I didn't end it. She was depressed and talked to Todd. A week later they were having lovemaking regularly, and the next week I finally caught them. But it was too late. She expressed regret for being slow, thinking everything would have been fine if she had figured it out sooner. I was being a smart ass, and she remarked that it didn't suit me. It was time to go. I sat quietly for a moment, trying to come up with some clever repartee that never materialized. What I did to Todd was cruel and unnecessary. She questioned why it was cruel, emphasizing that Todd never did anything to deserve it. He never tried to seduce her or disrespected me in any fashion. She expressed that Todd never attempted to take her away, questioning whether he had intentions of breaking up our marriage. She asserted that Todd only did what she had asked him to do, acknowledging that he made a few bad judgment calls. As a consequence, Todd now has to walk with a cane for the rest of his life. In her perspective, she expressed that it was not fair, Daniel. I responded, expressing that she should try walking a mile in my shoes before making such a statement. I mentioned that my response was as clever as I could manage on short notice. As I stood, I noticed tears welling up in her eyes. As I walked out the door, I heard an audible sob. 8 hours later, I was back in Nashville. Needless to say, Grady was disappointed when I gave him the news. However, he did have a very nice severance package for me. I called Carly and shared the details of the conversation with her mother. I suggested that she make an effort to contact her, but she didn't seem too responsive. A week later, I left Tennessee with a new pickup and a comfortable bankroll. I ended up in Yuba City. Merrill Kohout had decided to sell his auto body shop and move to Hawaii. I knew the business and was confident that I could run the operation and still send Merrill and his wife a nice little retirement check every month. It was a clean operation just outside of town and included a small 2-bedroom cottage in the back. It was all that I needed. 10 men came with the business. I kept 6 and let the slackers go. I could pick up some new ones as I went along. I was going to burn all those damn suits that I had accumulated, but I ended up giving them to the Salvation Army. They had a job interview program set up, and the suits would come in handy for somebody that needed them. My mustache grew back with vigor. It seemed to be happy to be released from the constraints that it had been forced to live with over the past few years. In no time, my hair was long enough to tie back. Look out, Willie Nelson. Here comes Daniel Hemingway. The business flourished, and I felt like my old self. Things were going great until the week before Christmas. When I arrived at work that morning, there was a small wrapped package on my desk. I looked at it for a moment and called my foreman in. "What the hell is this?" "Don't know, boss. A lady came in early this morning and left it there. She said that she would be back at lunchtime." I sat for a long time without touching it. I knew what was in the damn box. There was no doubt in my mind. What I didn't know was what I was going to do after I opened it. I got a hot cup of black coffee and stared at the box for a few more minutes and then started to unwrap it. For some strange reason, I was being careful not to tear the paper. My foreman came back in and saw me holding the black plastic object with about 20 little holes in it. "What the hell is that, boss?" I set it down and leaned back in my chair. "I'll tell you after lunch."
Story 3.
My parents kicked me out at 18 to move in my sister's boyfriend. Years later, they showed up asking for my help after her boyfriend abandoned her and they retired broke. Hey guys! So to begin with, 5 years ago, when I was 18, my parents asked me to leave and kicked me out of the house because, according to them, it was more important for my sister's boyfriend to move in with her. I, 23, female, have an older sister, Chloe, who's 4 years older than me. When she was 22, Chloe got pregnant with her boyfriend and she had to move back in with us. She had been working for a couple of months at the time, but she hadn't saved up enough money to afford to raise a baby and live on her own at the same time, so she came back home. And 3 months into the pregnancy, she got it into her head that it would be better for her boyfriend to move in with her as well. She felt like it was important for her to have the baby's father around for proper development. Don't even ask me about that. I wouldn't have had any issue with it, but she was living with us, so I felt like it was a bit of an unreasonable demand because our house wasn't really that massive. And I wasn't sure if it would be able to accommodate all of us. I had initially believed that my parents would decline and not let her have her boyfriend move in, but I had no idea that they were actually planning on agreeing with her and kicking me out instead. A couple of months after Chloe had moved in, my parents told me that they were planning on having her boyfriend move in as well, so I would have to give up my room. I was shocked since I really hadn't seen it coming, and I was stupid enough to ask them where exactly I was going to be staying in the house. Then that's when my parents clarified that they wanted me to leave the house altogether, since now I was 18 and it was about time that I left the nest. I had decided to take a gap year, so I wasn't going to college, and that was out of the question. Apart from that, I could have moved in with my grandparents or my friends. But I just didn't understand why I had to move out of my house at all. It was my home as well, not just my sister's, and the fact that she was pregnant didn't mean that she could do whatever she wanted and my parents had to agree with it. I tried to fight with them, but my parents told me that I was an adult, I had to deal with life on my own, and I had no right to feel entitled to live with them anymore. Especially when my sister was pregnant, and she wanted her partner by her side. I tried to explain to them that she could share her room with her boyfriend, but they told me that it was not possible because she wanted her own space as she got bigger. And her room was small enough as it was. Having her boyfriend move into that room would only make it more cramped, so she wanted him in a different room. I suggested maybe he could live in the living room, but apparently her boyfriend had a back injury, so that was not feasible. I was desperate not to leave at the time, so I suggested that maybe I could live in the living room instead. But they told me that they wanted me to leave because having somebody stay in the living room was kind of unseemly. They were just not ready to hear me out, and after a while it became very obvious to me that they just wanted me to leave. I definitely blame my parents for the way they were behaving with me, but I also thought that my sister was being unreasonable and entitled. Not only did she want her boyfriend to move in with us, but she also wanted a separate room for him, and because of that, I would have to move out even though I was not even ready for it. I felt terrible about it, and I had a huge fight with my family the day that I was told to leave. I called them all selfish and said that I never wanted to see them again because they were all disgusting, horrible people. And I was ashamed to even be related to them. Then I packed whatever I owned and called up a couple of friends so that they could help me move out. Within the next 3 days, I had spoken to my grandparents, and my mom's parents were a bit skeptical about having me live with them. But I don't really blame them since my grandpa had always been really sick and my grandma had enough on her plate trying to take care of him. So I decided to move in with my paternal grandparents, and when they heard exactly why I had to leave my parents' house, they were outraged. They really gave my parents a piece of their mind, and then they stopped speaking to them altogether. I was very depressed, even though I had my grandparents and my friends by my side. I had always thought that I had a good relationship with my parents and even my sister. So I didn't understand why they were treating me like this. But it all became clear to me the day after I left, and my sister sent a letter to me through one of her friends. I still have that letter with me because it was just so bizarre. But anyway, the letter said that the reason she had convinced our parents to kick me out of the house was because of her boyfriend. Apparently, she said that he was a bit of a flirt, and they hadn't exactly been in a committed relationship with each other when she got pregnant. They only made things official after she realized that she was pregnant, and she was afraid that he still wasn't very sure of the relationship. She said that she had to fight really hard to get him to agree to move in with her and commit to raising the baby with her, and so she did not want another woman in the house because that would put the entire situation at risk. I couldn't even imagine why Chloe was willing to have a baby with a man like this, since she was obviously very insecure and didn't trust him. And the fact that she felt like she had to get me to leave the house just so that her boyfriend wouldn't be tempted to flirt or hook up with me was just crazy. I had half a mind to text her and tell her that she had no self-respect and it was pathetic that she was still trying to be with a man like this and even having his baby, but clearly she was not thinking straight, so I decided to say nothing. Besides, being with a man like this was punishment enough for her, so I wanted nothing to do with her or my family anymore. She had no self-respect or dignity, and since my parents were so easily influenced by my sister, they clearly showed me where I stood with them. I decided that not speaking to them would be the best thing to do in this situation, and then I started trying to move on with my life. I had never really been inclined towards academics in the first place, which is why I decided to take a gap year and think about what I really wanted to do with my life. I did not want a typical 9-to-5 job, and I know it sounds kind of strange, but I always felt like that kind of lifestyle would be too restrictive for me. I'm a self-taught musician. I can play both the guitar and drums, and I've been playing since I was 12, so I'd say that I was pretty good. And during the gap year, I kind of realized that this is what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a musician, and I knew that there was not a lot of money in this career, but it would make me happy. And that's all that I wanted. And I thought that maybe I would be able to make it big someday. At the time, I didn't know that it would actually come true, well, at least sort of. Initially, I was only playing small gigs, and money was tough. I was heavily reliant on my grandparents for money, and it took me a really long time to be able to afford an apartment. And even then, it was a really tiny one that I had to share with a roommate. After that, I started getting slightly more serious gigs until the beginning of this year, when I auditioned to work with a music producer. And I won't be taking names, but I got the gig. I'll be playing the guitar in a couple of songs for a film, and I'm getting compensated really handsomely for that. I've already received some money for that in advance and have managed to move into a better apartment, and I'll be getting the rest after the entire job is done. After this, I think I'm going to be getting even more work with the resume that I have. The only people who knew about it were a couple of my friends and my grandparents, and I don't know who spoke out of town. But somehow my parents were able to find out about it. I haven't even posted any of this on social media yet because I don't want to talk about it too soon. Nothing is really permanent in showbiz anyway. 2 days ago, my family somehow found out where I lived, and they showed up at my door. Obviously, they needed my help since I'm doing better in life right now, and both my parents have retired. So they need somebody to support my sister and her kid. I did not invite them in when they showed up. I was too surprised to do anything but just stare. Anyway, since I wasn't in a position to speak to them, they congratulated me and said that they were here to make things right with me. Not just because we were family, but also because they needed my help since Chloe's boyfriend had walked out on her 2 years ago. And as soon as they found out that I was working as a guitarist in a film soundtrack, they knew that they had to get in touch with me because it's such a huge deal. They also told me that Chloe was struggling to keep up with the business that she had started since her boyfriend had left, and both my parents had retired last year, so now they needed me to step up and help my sister out. They told me that they were hoping that I would not turn them away since it had been a long time since we had spoken, and in spite of everything that had happened, we were still family. So we needed to be there for each other above all things. I found that to be perfectly laughable because they had not been there for me at all. And in fact, they had taken every possible measure to make sure that they didn't have to be there for me. Even right now, they were only here because my sister's boyfriend had walked out on her, and she did not have anyone to support her. Apparently she was getting child support, but that was barely going to cut it in the future because it was a miserable amount. And my sister had been running a flower shop with her friend after her baby was born, but even that was not doing well right now, so they had turned to me for help. But the situation was so ironic that I literally couldn't help but laugh in their faces, especially because I remember the letter that my sister had sent to me the day after I left. She herself had known all along that she was not sure of the relationship that she had with her boyfriend, and yet she had chosen him over having a good relationship with me, and now look where that had landed her. So I went back into my house after telling them to wait outside. I got the letter that I had kept safely with me, and I returned it to the person who had written it and told her to read it out loud to our parents so they could know exactly why they had kicked me out all those years ago. Chloe went red in the face when she saw that and refused to read it out, so I took it back from her and I read it out loud. After I was done, my parents looked shocked and embarrassed at the same time because they had realized they had been manipulated, and they were so weak-willed that they couldn't even tell right from wrong. Most of all, they seemed to be pissed at Chloe because it appeared that she had known all along that he was not the right guy, and she had decided to put her faith in him. In doing so, not only had she screwed herself out of a safe and secure future, but she had also made things very difficult for our parents, because now they had no choice but to support her. None of them had any idea what to say after that letter had been read, so I just told them that whatever was happening with them right now, they totally deserved it, especially Chloe, since she had known that the guy she had been with was not the right kind of person. And yet she had chosen to sacrifice everything for him. So this was on her right now, and I felt no obligation to help her out. She started crying when I said that and told me that she had expected me to be a bit more compassionate since she was in love with him. And that's why she had wanted to make things work with him. She just did not want to take any risks, and she knew that having me around would be an issue because she did not want him to feel tempted by anyone else. She was ready to admit that she had not been thinking straight, but that was only because she was having a baby. And she wanted to do everything in her power to make sure that her boyfriend stayed with her and did not abandon her and their kid. But to blame her for the situation that she was in right now was just insensitive of me, and she said that she expected better. I didn't have anything to say about that, so I just slammed the door shut and told them to leave after that. Since then, I've received a bunch of messages from her friends saying that I was very insensitive and that she hasn't stopped crying ever since I said that all of this was her own fault. So now I have to ask Aita for telling my sister that it was her own fault that her boyfriend abandoned her and her kid? Update 1. I've made up my mind. I'm not going to be apologizing for anything that I have said. The comments made me realize that even though I was trying to treat the situation as somewhat normal, what Chloe had done was beyond abnormal. It was bizarre and pathetic, and honestly, she definitely did deserve it. So it's not like I had said anything wrong. And if she thinks that getting her friends to text me and tell me that I'm insensitive for saying what I said, and that maybe I'll apologize to her, she's wrong. She needs to realize that somebody had to put her in her place, and that somebody had to be me since she still had the audacity to show up at my place and ask for help after everything that happened to me because of her. Of course, I don't blame solely her. My parents were equally at fault. But the situation wouldn't have taken place at all if she had just had some common sense. I had to work really hard to get to where I am today, and I'm not going to give a single dollar away to anyone who doesn't deserve it, in my opinion. Even if her business is not doing well, at least she still has it. She can make the best of her situation. There's no need for her to act like she's a charity case, in my opinion. My parents and even my sister have always been the kind of people who think that they should always be doing well. As soon as they hit a tough spot, they start acting like maniacs, and it's like they're going to lose everything the next day. In my opinion, they have absolutely no fighting spirit, and I'm glad I'm not like them. I'm saying this because even when I was in middle school, I remember my dad had lost his job because the company that he was working in had some crisis that I don't remember. Anyway, everyone in my family completely lost their heads, and my dad ended up borrowing a bunch of money from our grandparents. My parents had their own savings, just to be clear, and even my mother had a job at the time, so it was not like there was any reason to panic. But yeah, I have no idea why they did that, and the crazy thing is that they never even bothered to return the money that they had borrowed. I guess they didn't take it seriously because it was just my grandparents that they were getting it from, and it seems like they're doing the same thing again. But this time, it's my sister's business that's suffering. But unlike my grandparents, I don't feel obliged to help her out. She can either deal with it on her own, or she can ask somebody else for help because I'm genuinely not interested. Update 2. So last week, my family showed up at my door, and then Chloe's friends started sending me a bunch of messages saying that I had been insensitive, and they thought that I should apologize to her. I did not, obviously. After that, for the past couple of days, I had no contact with them, and I was pretty busy as well because I had work. I still had other gigs. Last night, I came back home around 1 p.m. and I was really exhausted. But that's the exact moment when my parents decided to call me up. They had used a burner phone, I guess. I couldn't recognize the number. I thought it was a work phone call, so I picked it up, and as soon as I did, my parents told me that they had thought about it and had decided to cut my sister out of their lives. I did not know what to say because it was really sudden, and I hadn't seen it coming. Besides, I had assumed that it was Chloe who needed my help, not my parents. So I did not understand what they stood to gain by cutting my sister out of their lives. Anyway, I told them that it was great news, but even then, I wanted nothing to do with them because of the way that they had treated me in the past. It was not something that I could forgive and forget yet so soon. I know that it is not exactly so soon, but it didn't matter. I just didn't want to speak to my parents. I was happy enough with my life having no contact with my family, and I don't think that anyone in my place will ever be able to move on from what had happened. If I had had a bad relationship with them right from the beginning, and then they had kicked me out when I turned 18, I probably would have found it easier to accept. But all of it just came as such a huge shock to me that I couldn't deal with it emotionally for a really long time. And now that I finally have accepted it, I don't want them back in my life. So I made that very clear to them. I told them that their relationship with Chloe did not bother me at all because I did not want to have a relationship with them in any capacity, and that was my final decision. I was about to hang up, but my mother stopped me and said that they had done what I had wanted to, so I had to be there for them, and I couldn't make excuses like this. I couldn't for the life of me understand what they were talking about, so I asked them to elaborate, and they told me that they had assumed that I had obviously read out that letter because I wanted them to know the truth about why Chloe had asked them to kick me out and realized that they had been manipulated. And they were right about that, but they weren't horribly wrong after that. Apparently, they had somehow started to believe that the only reason I wanted them to know that they had been manipulated was so that they could cut Chloe out of their lives, and then I would be willing to rebuild my relationship with them and even help them out in the future now that they had retired. I was really confused because I had not hinted at that at all, and if they had started to believe something like this, it was completely on them and not on me. So I told them that I had not given them any hints, but my parents started yelling at me, saying that I had been misleading them, and now I had to promise to help them out whenever they needed it in the future. Apparently, they had been spending a lot of money on helping Chloe keep up with the bills and also raise her son, so they feared that they hadn't saved up enough money for their own retirement. They didn't have the option of going back again, so they had to rely on their other daughter, and they were appalled that I was refusing to help them out. I don't even understand what was wrong with my parents, but it was ridiculous that I decided to hang up on them while they were talking about how they expected me to help them out. And then I blocked that number, and I have decided that I'm not going to be taking any calls from any numbers that I don't recognize right away. And I might even install some apps to help me place unrecognized phone numbers because I'm so sick of my family right now, I just don't want to be reachable to them, plain and simple. I've also spoken to my grandparents about it, and they think that I have the right idea about cutting them out of my life completely and not allowing them to reach me. Things have pretty much gone downhill in my personal life ever since I opened the door the other day. I guess I shouldn't have opened the door to my apartment at all, and that would have saved me a lot of trouble because now it feels like they're stuck on me and are refusing to leave me alone. Update 3. The funniest thing just happened today, and I feel like I have to share it. So it has been 2 weeks since my parents last contacted me, and after I blocked them. They thankfully did not try to reach out to me again, apart from an email that they had sent 2 days after I blocked them, saying that they would still be cutting Chloe out of their lives entirely if and only if I promised to take care of them in the future. Honestly, I think it's very sad that they're willing to cut her out of their lives because it just goes to show that they cannot be loyal to even one of their daughters. They are horrible parents, and I can't say that I feel bad about what I did today because all 3 of them are equally bad. Anyway, for the last 2 weeks, I hadn't been in touch with them, and I was pretty busy. But today, around 8 in the morning, I was going through my emails, and I realized that I had received one from Chloe. She had been very patronizing and pompous in that one, saying that she was ready to forgive me for what I had said about all of this being her fault, and that she had deserved this because she knew that it was coming from a place of bitterness and hatred. And even though I had not apologized for anything, she still managed to find forgiveness in her heart for me because she was surrounded by kindness, like her friends and her family. No matter what, she will always have her parents and people who loved her, no matter who left her, and I was just jealous that I would never have that. She was bragging about this support system that she had, and she had included our parents in it, so I assumed that she had no idea that they had been planning to cut her off so they could get on my good side, because I'm on my path to success right now. And it was just so funny because all I had to do was take a screenshot of the message that my parents had sent me and send it to her as a reply to the email that she had sent me to show her exactly how much her parents loved her. It's just sad because I'm pretty sure that if you put all their money together, they will be able to get by, and they have no reason to be acting like this. But they're just so greedy that as soon as they see anybody doing slightly better in their lives, they feel like they have to get a piece of it. First, it was my grandparents, since they are pretty well off and they're not stupid, so they know how to manage their wealth. And now it's me because I'm doing better than my sister. It's very obvious to me that none of them value each other, and I think they should know that. Update 4. Hi everyone! So many of you wanted an update on the situation with my family. I have nothing to do with them anymore, but from what I know, there's an uproar in the family right now. The message that I sent, the one where I had exposed my parents for saying that they were ready to cut Chloe out of their lives as long as I promised them that I would help them out in the future, pretty much shattered any relationship that they had with each other. Chloe, like an idiot, put up a huge post about it on social media, saying that she had always put her trust in the wrong people, but she had apparently never expected her parents to turn out the same way because, well, they were her parents. I don't think she was wrong for that. Nobody expects their parents to turn out like this, but I think she should have seen this coming after they kicked me out. They have no loyalty towards anyone apart from themselves. In retaliation to her post, my parents put up another post, saying that she had been leeching off of them for the past couple of years, and they had been supporting her without any questions. But there has to be a limit to everything. She can't expect to live off her parents indefinitely, so they are caught in a social media battle right now, and there's a lot of drama surrounding them, which is definitely not good press for her flower shop. At least my parents are still retired, but she has a reputation to think of, and she doesn't even seem to care about it. She only cares about getting back at her parents. And I'm not even surprised that she's not successful right now. She's only looking at the short-term goals, and that's how she has been her entire life. My grandparents and I are just sitting back and enjoying the drama that's unfolding because even though I have nothing to do with it, I kind of do have everything to do with it right now. Both of them have had the good sense to keep me out of their posts because they probably know that if I get involved, all three of them will come out really badly. Anyway, I don't even want to speak up about any of this and give them the attention that they're seeking right now. It's very obvious to me that they only want people to sympathize with them, but so far nobody from our family has fallen for it. In fact, people are kind of avoiding them because of how they act, and it is so stupid that they don't even realize their own actions are having the opposite of the desired effect. But whatever, my life is pretty great right now, and that's all that matters to me.
Story 4. Restless energy defined Stan's character, making it nearly impossible for him to stay in one place. In his younger years, his love for the outdoors had been his sanctuary, a place where he felt alive. From the rugged trails of the Lake District to the challenging climbs of Ben Nevis, he embraced the wilderness as his escape from the monotony of daily life. Those experiences left an indelible mark, shaping his perspective on resilience and solitude. As time passed, however, the vigor of his youth gave way to the weight of adult responsibilities. His life became a routine of early commutes, demanding hours at work and nights spent balancing the struggles of marriage. Though he cherished his wife Susie deeply, he couldn't ignore the growing chasm between them, a divide filled with unspoken words and unmet expectations. For years, they had coasted through life together, avoiding the harder truths that neither dared confront. Stan exhaled, pushing the stale air of the clinic out of his lungs, and paused at the doorway, soaking in the warmth of the sunlight. He promised himself a cup of coffee when all was said and done, then made his way across the hospital parking lot toward a quiet shopping center. Two boys on BMX bikes were showing off, pulling stunts around the security posts, balancing on one wheel before speeding off down an alley. He trailed behind them slowly, each step deliberate. After a while, Stan found himself staring through the dirty window of the dry cleaners. Time to pull yourself together, he told himself. As expected, the news had been grim, and his thoughts were muddled in the haze of what he'd just learned. He should have brought Susie with him. Now he struggled to remember why he hadn't. She would have remembered every word the oncologist said, taken notes, asked more insightful questions. Watching the boys jump over cracked pavement, a wave of emptiness and disgust washed over him. It felt as though no time had passed since he, too, had been a schoolboy, filled with the same naive excitement about life unfolding. Now, staring at the bleak suburban scene, he felt like he might already be dust. There wasn't even a cafe here. The diagnosis was bladder cancer, with secondary tumors in his pelvis and chest. The plan was for urgent surgery in 3 days, followed by radiation and chemotherapy. The oncologist hadn't sugarcoated the prognosis. "So I'm likely going to pass?" Stan had asked. The young doctor nodded. "But there's still hope. We'll do our best to manage the pain and give you as much time as possible. Stay positive." Stan steadied himself and pulled out his phone. He tried calling Susie's office, but the call went unanswered. He stood there, silently hoping someone would pick up. "Come on, Susie, pick up. I really need to talk to you. Just this once." Finally, an unfamiliar receptionist answered and said Susie wasn't available. Stan explained that he was her husband, this was an emergency, and he needed to speak with her urgently. After a long pause, the receptionist flatly informed him that Susie was on vacation that day. "You'll have to try elsewhere." Stan was taken aback, and for a moment his own problems slipped away. Susie was always at work. She never missed a day, not due to illness or anything else. He dialed the house number just in case, but it went straight to voicemail. He called her mobile next. She was never good about answering her phone, and sure enough, the call went to voicemail again. Instead of leaving a frustrated message, he sent a text. "Call me back as soon as you see this. Need to talk." By the time he reached his car, there was a reply. "What's the problem?" The response felt weak, but it still hit him hard. Why hadn't she called him back? He dialed again, but once more the call went to voicemail. He felt terribly alone. On the train to London, Susie had no reason to feel guilty, but she still spent most of the ride worrying. Why hadn't she told Stan about the trip? Clifford wasn't her lover, he was just a friend. Stan would have understood if she'd said she was helping him. Her guilt was irrational. She worked long hours and had few hobbies, so she deserved a break. It had nothing to do with Stan. She sipped a large coffee she bought at the station and flipped through a fashion magazine. Rush hour had passed, and the train was nearly empty. Despite her worries, she was able to relax and enjoy the moment. Yes, she had come close to cheating a few times over the years, but she hadn't hurt anyone, and that was the important thing. She had met Clifford 3 years ago on a tough day during a corporate law course. They'd worked together on a project for a month, then kept in touch, mostly by phone, to share legal advice. Over time, their conversations grew beyond work, becoming a friendship. Clifford had a sharp sense of humor and a rational outlook on life, a pleasant contrast to Stan's intense and unpredictable personality. Discussions about contract law often led to stories of their personal lives. Susie told Clifford about their struggles with housing. Stan was always fighting with their landlord or neighbors, so they moved frequently. Clifford shared hilarious stories about his own failed relationships, which ranged from dramatic to absurd, while his career thrived. Susie looked forward to Clifford's messages, especially the late-night emails that helped her unwind. What began as professional exchanges gradually evolved into a comfortable friendship, a welcome distraction from her daily pressures. From the start, Susie knew her feelings for Clifford were unprofessional. He intrigued her because he was so different from the men she knew. Stan was sharp and unpredictable. She had to stay on her toes to keep up with him. Clifford, however, was confident, smooth, and never lost his composure or ran out of things to say. Their conversations felt more honest than anything she had with anyone else. She played the role of the wise friend, asking about his personal life, happy that he took her advice seriously. He dated wealthy, well-connected women he met through work, and his love affairs followed a familiar pattern, starting with excitement and ending abruptly for no clear reason. She told him it was because he had trouble committing, that he couldn't trust anyone, and that he only felt in control when things were on his terms. Susie suspected that Clifford enjoyed the thrill of the chase and missed women once he had them. But for a time, he was deeply in love, a man who expressed his feelings openly and with humor, which she found endearing. She agonized over this distant relationship and told herself it would be fine as long as they never met. Aware of the risks, she believed that nothing bad would happen if she followed this rule. Stan had no reason to complain. No one got hurt, and everyone won. Susie and Clifford were close, but completely different. They trusted each other with their problems, but there was no chance of anything beyond a supportive friendship. Susie was breaking her own rule, heading to meet Clifford under exceptional circumstances. He had recently married, but now, devastated, he wrote to her about his wife's infidelity and their separation. He was alone and desperate for help. Susie knew she had to respond, even if it caused issues. Clifford was her friend, and helping him felt like the right thing to do. She could tell Stan the basics. Clifford was just a work friend, without going into the 5 years of secret correspondence. She considered this carefully. Revealing more would only fuel Stan's tendency to blow things out of proportion. And recently, Stan's moody, distant behavior made her hesitate to share her own concerns with him. She soon wondered if her anxiety came from the fear that meeting Clifford would change their friendship. She didn't feel glamorous enough to match his past lovers, and she worried she might disappoint him or irritate herself. But by the time the train reached London, she was glad she was meeting him, hoping it would confirm the unique bond they shared. When Susie got off the train at Euston Station, she saw Stan's text. Irritated, she read it. Stan never texted her. Why now? He also called, but she knew he understood she didn't take personal calls during work hours. Her irritation grew, fueled by guilt. What could be so urgent? She replied, "What's the problem?" but really meant, "Stop ruining my day." Moments later, another text arrived and her mood shifted. Bistro Cafe John Lewis. Can't wait to see you. Love you, Cliff. She tossed a few coins to a beggar on the way to Oxford Circus, forgetting about Stan's message. With no signal on the underground, the text went unanswered. Arriving at the bistro, her spirits lifted when she saw Clifford sitting outside. He turned when she approached, smiling as if they had known each other forever. They greeted each other with a kiss on the cheek, but then, unexpectedly, embraced like long-lost lovers. It felt simple and freeing, an expression of their relief at being together again. Susie couldn't take her eyes off his face, and Clifford smiled, trying to understand what was happening between them. They sat down for lunch, enjoying snacks, something Stan would never do. Susie ordered a fruit tart with cream, while Clifford went for beer and pork. They laughed at each other's choices. Then Clifford began to tell his story. It was painful, but Susie listened with empathy as he shared how he discovered his wife's affair. She had moved out while he was away on a business trip, leaving only a note. As Clifford spoke, tears filled his eyes, and he gripped his fork tightly. The intensity of the conversation left them both exhausted, and they decided to get some fresh air. After lunch, they walked through the department store, took a taxi to Cleopatra's Needle, then strolled along the Thames, past Downing Street, and up to Trafalgar Square. They even visited the National Gallery to see a new Titian painting. Susie was supposed to be home for dinner, but time slipped away. In the gallery cafe, she enjoyed Clifford's thoughtful, ironic way of speaking and his ability to pick up on her comments without dismissing them. He was a welcome distraction from his personal crisis, talking about work and a complex corporate takeover. They connected on so many levels. Later at a pub, Susie had a glass of wine and, before she knew it, was talking about Stan. It felt wrong to discuss her marriage with another man, but she quickly justified it by highlighting Stan's good qualities, his generosity, courage, and enthusiasm. But she also admitted how distant and withdrawn he had become, how he refused to talk or get help for what she suspected was depression. His sarcasm and cruel words often felt like personal attacks, and she struggled to deal with his moods. Clifford didn't criticize Stan. Instead, he supported her, saying, "We all deserve respect. He has no right to take his issues out on you." It felt good to have someone who understood. Talking to Clifford brought light to the dark corners of Susie's life. She hadn't felt this alive in a long time. For a while, Clifford was happy, and in return, she had a companion who happily joined her for shopping and endless conversations about work, love, and mutual interests. Clifford said it was a mistake not to meet sooner. "We wasted too much time. We need each other," he insisted. Susie reluctantly agreed, but she drew a line. "We can't date again. I love Stan, and being with you puts us in the wrong place," she said. Clifford pressed her. "At least stay for dinner. We need to talk about what happened between us." His voice carried desperation. "For the first time in a week, my life felt worth living," he confessed. "I was in so much pain I didn't know how I'd survive. Thoughts of you kept me going." Susie wanted to get home before Stan and cook dinner so he wouldn't know about her trip to London. The late trains were crowded and risky, and staying would only complicate things further. But Clifford was right. They deserved a dinner together. Still, Susie couldn't shake the feeling she was avoiding the real question. She wanted to stay, but didn't know what it meant. She didn't mean to flirt, but with Clifford she felt safe. He never made her uncomfortable or spoke ill of Stan. She sat next to him, their hands occasionally touching. It felt natural. Neither of them were seeking to exploit the situation. They simply wanted to see where it might lead. Despite the comfort, Susie's guilt lingered. The logical choice was to cool things down and plan another meeting when they had sorted out their feelings. Staying for dinner felt risky, but she didn't know what was right anymore. With an effort, she pulled her hand from Clifford's and excused herself to the restroom. She turned on her phone. Stan had texted, asking her to call. Surprised he didn't follow up, Susie decided to lie. She'd tell him she was in London for a last-minute meeting that ran late. It was a believable excuse. She dialed his number, but he didn't answer. Frustrated, she texted, "Sorry for the delay. Urgent meeting stuck in London. We'll be back late." Sending the text gave her a brief sense of relief. But before she could put her phone away, another message came in. "What meeting at work? They said you're on vacation." Susie's face flushed. Her lie had been exposed. Why hadn't Stan called? What could he know? She tried to focus but was distracted by the immediate failure of her plan. She called Stan repeatedly, but he didn't pick up. She felt a mix of humiliation and defiance. What did he expect if he played these games? She thought. Her next message read, "Didn't mean to bother you. Actually, I'm with my aunt in Tunbridge Wells. She's feeling sick and asked for help. Don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow." Her stomach churned. Why had she said that? She felt alarmed by her own lies. She knew she couldn't face Stan like this, so she decided to stay in London overnight to regain control before confronting him. But then she realized it was wrong. The smart thing would be to stick to her plan and return home. Surprising Stan with a late arrival from Tunbridge Wells seemed safer, and staying in London could risk everything, both with Clifford and with Stan. With a sense of relief at her decision, Susie pocketed her phone and hurried back to Clifford. When she returned, he pulled her close, brushing his hand over her shoulder and neck before kissing her. "You were gone so long, I thought you had run away," he said. She felt comforted, her worries easing as she absorbed his relief. But after a long embrace, she pulled away. She needed to think for both of them. "Cliff, I need a hotel room for the night. Don't insist, but I'm staying in London. We can have dinner without worrying about time, but after dinner, I'll say goodnight. Do you understand? We need to protect what we have." Clifford agreed, kissing her again. "Thank you, Susie. You're a miracle. I don't know what I'd do without you." Despite agreeing to return home, Susie was horrified by her decision to stay. It felt cowardly, like she couldn't face Stan while her feelings for Clifford were still fresh. As Susie sat at the table, she thought, it'll be clearer in the morning. While Clifford called hotels for her, she checked her phone. No new texts. Frustrated, she tried calling Stan again, but there was still no answer. Why was he being so difficult? The silence between them grew, and Clifford, now having found a hotel, suggested they figure out where to eat. To hell with it, Susie decided. She'd enjoy the evening and deal with everything else later. Taking Clifford's arm, she pressed her cheek to his, comforted by his scent. She wasn't sure what was right anymore, and frankly, she didn't care. Over dinner, the conversation shifted. Clifford, eating his lemon tart, said, "Today's been like a miracle. I didn't think I could be this happy again." Susie, quietly moved, admitted, "I want to be with you so much, but I can't. It would ruin everything. We need to be realistic about when we can be together." Clifford agreed, his eyes understanding. "The moments we do have will be precious. Nothing else matters." Susie, whispering, said, "It's a lie. Staying apart is a self-inflicted wound." When they kissed again, Clifford's palm rested gently on her chest, their bodies close. "No intimacy," Susie insisted, her voice shaky. "What we feel has nothing to do with that." Clifford, with quiet intensity, said, "Then what is it, Susie?" "I love you." His hand on her knee, his warmth so close, felt right, but she was careful, not wanting to take unnecessary risks. When he touched her knee again, she placed her hand over his. "Please don't ruin dinner," she said softly. "I've enjoyed this so much. You're charming. I like you, but I'm married. I can't express my feelings like you can." "But can't you say it?" he asked, his eyes pleading. "Do you love me? Even a little bit?" "You know the answer to that," she replied, her heart racing. "Would I be here if I didn't love you?" They kissed again, but this time she quickly pulled away. Looking at Clifford's dark curls and the thoughtful expression in his eyes, Susie knew she loved him. It shocked her. She had always believed her love for Stan would shield her from loving anyone else, but now she realized that it wasn't just about Zex. It was the bond they shared, the closeness. She felt like a teenager caught in her first crush, unsure of what to do. The adult side of her said she should go to bed with Clifford, but loyalty to Stan and fear of making things worse kept her in turmoil. Even as her heart pulled her toward Clifford, she kept saying no. Clifford, understanding her struggle, finished his coffee. It was 10 p.m. now, and Susie, feeling the effects of the wine and her thoughts, went to the restroom, hoping to clear her head. If only she could talk to Stan, she thought, things would be better. But when she checked her phone, there were still no responses. She called home, then Stan's cell again. No answer. Why wasn't he picking up? Panic set in. He knows, she thought. Stan knows I'm with someone else. The thought consumed her. Stan's sharp mind would catch her, and the shame of being exposed would destroy her. Rushing back to the table, Susie, trembling, said to Clifford, "I want to, but I can't. I'm sorry. This is all too much. I can't handle it. It's not right." Relief washed over her as the words left her mouth. She bolted outside into the fresh air, and Clifford followed. They got caught in the crowd heading for the subway. Clifford held her hand, speaking, but Susie wasn't listening. She saw the tears in his eyes and felt a new strength. "We can have one last drink at my hotel," she said, her tone softer. "But that's it. We had a wonderful day. I'll never forget it. And who knows what will happen next? Nothing's for sure." Susie knew she couldn't sleep with Clifford. She wasn't drunk, and she had made it clear that wasn't going to happen. Zex might have been easy, but the guilt, the constant fear of being caught, and the need to lie to Stan made it all too complicated. She had no desire for that life. They went to the hotel bar, and Clifford ordered champagne to mark a special day, one that stood out from their usual routines. Susie, feeling relieved by her decision, enjoyed the drink and kissed Clifford, grateful for his understanding. It felt right. He deserved her affection, and she wanted him to love her. She knew Stan couldn't give her the same, but she could handle it. Everything seemed fine, until later. 2 hours later, Clifford was asleep beside her, smiling gently. Susie was confused. How did this happen? They had shared an intimate moment in the bar, reluctant to show their feelings too openly, but there was no denying their attraction. After finishing the champagne, the night deepened, and emotions ran high. Clifford whispered, "This is so important. I'll treasure this moment forever." Susie responded, "I love Stan, but my feelings for you are real." Clifford leaned in, asking her to prove it, and soon they were in bed together. Clifford was clumsy but persistent, and Susie appreciated his effort, though it wasn't as smooth as with Stan. She let herself be vulnerable, trying to make it special for him. They both hoped the night would be unforgettable, but it wasn't. They were tired and had drunk too much. Despite the passion, they both knew, without saying it, that the physical intimacy had been a mistake. Susie regretted it, feeling that the act had not strengthened their bond, but only complicated things. She had lied to Stan, and that lie weighed heavily on her. Meanwhile, Stan sat alone at home, growing anxious as evening wore on. Susie's absence felt wrong, and soon he realized she hadn't gone to London for work. Her lie was too careless. He recalled the small details, how she had changed clothes before leaving for work, a sign she wasn't going to the office. She was trying to hide her intentions from him. Stan's mind raced through past conversations, particularly one argument over organic milk. Susie had argued for an unusual stance, one he hadn't heard from her before. Could it have come from someone else? He wondered. By evening, Stan was certain Susie was with her lover. The signs had all been there, but he had ignored them. Now it was clear she had betrayed him. Their once close relationship had changed, and Stan was left facing the truth. Susie had distanced herself long before the lies began. At first, Stan thought his exhaustion was just from being sick, but now he wasn't so sure. Susie, being smart, should have noticed his illness and stepped in to help, as they always had during tough times. He knew he had to snap out of it. He didn't want to waste the rest of his life wallowing in anger and self-pity. Stop whining and move on, he told himself. Pushing through, he made coffee, played London Calling by The Clash, and tried to lift his mood. Susie had left him. Fine, he'd leave her. Death was a final goodbye, after all. As he sipped his coffee, Stan thought back to the few moments in life that had truly brought him joy, like reaching the top of a mountain after a tough climb, the sense of accomplishment and peace. The Lake District was one place he always wanted to visit again, a place filled with youthful memories of camping and climbing. There was nothing stopping him. After a quick online search, he called a hotel and, to his surprise, found a room available. It felt like fate. He packed his bag, wrote a brief note to Susie, and left the house around midnight. On the drive, he saw a missed call from Susie, but didn't bother to check. He didn't want to hear her excuses. 4 hours later, he stopped for breakfast at a quiet auto repair shop, then continued his journey, feeling better with every mile as the mountains came into view. Arriving at the Lake District, Stan felt the weight lift off his shoulders. He changed into his boots and took a walk along the lake, already feeling restored by the fresh air. At the hotel bar, he studied the map for a hike to Scafell Pike, bought some snacks, and set off. The trail was busy with other hikers, but as he climbed, his hips started to ache, forcing him to slow down. He took ibuprofen and pressed on, thinking, I even passed a few slowpokes. As he veered off the main path to Lord's Rake, he met two young women, Bella and Simone, who were unsure about the route. He offered to guide them, explaining his illness as he needed to stop frequently. They were kind and asked insightful questions, and along the way he learned they had just finished their final exams at Lancaster University. Together they reached the top of Scafell, and Stan, though exhausted, found joy in their youthful energy and their genuine concern for him. At the summit, they shared chocolate and then descended to Mickledore before reaching the top of Scafell Pike. The whole time, Stan didn't think about Susie or death. Despite the pain, for the first time in a while, he felt alive again. Susie woke up feeling great after her night with Clifford. She'd sent him home at 2 a.m., and now, after a quick shower and breakfast, she was ready to head back to London. She felt a sense of relief that her little adventure had gone smoothly. though she realized she was running late for work. The events of the night seemed easier to process with the benefit of sleep. So what if she'd given in to temptation? That was behind her now. She had handled the situation well, acted on her beliefs, and survived. Time to get back to normal. On her way home from the station, Susie changed into the outfit she had left behind the day before. She was in control again and ready to face Stan. The panic she had felt was a distant memory. She quickly showered and put on a business suit, determined not to be late again. If she met Clifford again, she'd suggest a day trip to Cambridge, something Stan wouldn't enjoy, but she could share with Clifford. When Susie got home, she found the house empty. She was disappointed. She had hoped to clear the air with Stan immediately. Now she would have to hold on to her explanation until evening. She glanced at the note Stan had left her on the bulletin board. It read, "Received bad news. I left to think. Not sure when I'll be back. At least on Friday. Hope you enjoyed your night in London. Say hi to your friend for me, Stan." Susie read it several times. Her first reaction was irritation. What was Stan playing at? The bad news sounded vague, and she wondered why he couldn't be clear about it. Was his mother ill? Did he lose his job? He worked for a volatile company, and maybe his luck had run out. Or had he been fired for losing his temper? Stan was smart, but his temper wasn't always under control. The sarcastic mention of her friend bothered her too. Stan was trying to make her feel guilty. She called his cell phone, but there was no answer, so she rang his work and spoke to his secretary, who sounded awkward. "Stan took sick leave," the secretary said. "Sick leave?" Susie asked, confused. "Yes, he's off until the end of next week." "That's ridiculous. Stan isn't sick," Susie insisted. The girl was uncomfortable with the topic of pain. Susie hung up, feeling unsettled. Could Stan really be ill? He had hidden it well, but now that she thought about it, he had been moving slower recently, dragging his feet up the stairs and struggling with simple tasks. Had she missed the signs? Her stomach churned. Was Stan covering up his emotional pain with a physical illness? Could he have found out about Clifford? The idea made her feel nauseous. But why had Stan acted so impulsively, disappearing without telling her? She needed to talk to him, but couldn't shake the fear that he knew about Clifford. After a deep breath, she checked her phone for recent calls. Among the missed calls was an unfamiliar number from the previous afternoon. She dialed it. "Good morning, Wastewater Hotel. How can I help you?" A voice answered. Susie quickly pieced things together. "I'm looking for my husband's reservation." "Stanley Marshall," she said. "Yes, ma'am. He's booked a single room for tonight." That was strange. If Stan was really sick, why would he go to the Lake District alone to hike? She knew Stan used climbing to clear his mind, but it didn't make sense for him to go mountain climbing while pretending to be ill. He had to be lying about something, and there was only one explanation for why he'd left without telling her. Susie was in tears, overwhelmed by guilt and the damage she'd caused. She called into work, claiming a family emergency, not thinking about rescheduling meetings or missed deadlines. She wasn't much of a walker, but she had the right gear, a map, and GPS. She ignored 2 texts from Clifford, still no word from Stan. After her coffee, she headed to the car. Stan, meanwhile, had a dull ache in his hip, much better than the pain he'd felt earlier on the freeway. He needed to rest. He gave Bella some money for drinks while he and Simone made their way through the crowded hotel bar and found a spot by the coal fire. The warmth felt good, and he relaxed, though he was still exhausted. The bar buzzed with laughter and talk of mountain hikes. Bella chatted away, and Stan forced a smile. It was only when Simone returned with drinks that he felt a bit better. They planned for the girls to freshen up in his room before heading back to university. After they ate, Stan chose a beef pie and chips, but couldn't eat much. The girls finished his food, and Stan glanced around the bar, deciding on his next beer. That's when he spotted Susie standing out in the crowd. He was stunned. What was she doing here? Before he could think further, Susie saw him, her uncertainty clear. On impulse, Stan kissed Bella and Simone on the cheek. "Before you go, thank you for today. I hope we'll remember this as a special day," he said. When he stood up, Susie was right there, looking angry. "How did you find me?" Stan asked, forcing a smile. "This is Bella and Simone. They're my friends. Don't worry." All 3 women looked confused. "Maybe it's time for you girls to freshen up," Stan suggested, his voice flat. As the girls left, Susie turned to him, her voice tight. "Stan, what's going on? And who are these girls? I read your note. What does it mean?" "They're students from Lancaster University," Stan explained. "We met on the hike. Their energy helped me get to the top of Scafell Pike." Susie, frustrated, asked, "But what about you? Why did you leave without telling me?" I sent you a message saying we need to talk, but that's not important now. You didn't need to come here. A phone call would have sufficed. Susie felt a twinge of panic. What happened? What did you want to tell me? Stan shrugged. I just needed some human support. The girls were kind enough to give it. I went to the hospital yesterday, had some tests. I've got cancer, bladder cancer. Susie froze, gripping the table. I knew it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried, but you didn't answer my calls. You were too busy with your aunt, remember? He replied, voice flat. I didn't go to visit my aunt, Susie admitted, her voice shaking. I lied to you. I shouldn't have. She closed her eyes, feeling sick. I should have been there for you. I'm so sorry. Stan regarded her carefully. This was unlike his wife. It doesn't matter, he said. This is about me now, not about your guilt. We all die alone anyway. Please, Stan, Susie whispered. Let me take care of you. I want to help. Forget about me, he said, his tone harsh. What's wrong with you? How's your aunt? Susie couldn't hold back the tears. Stan, I came for you as soon as I could, but I had to go to London. She hesitated. I didn't visit my aunt. I lied about that. I'm sorry. But this is the worst time to tell you everything. Stan nodded slowly and in a small gesture of care, handed over a 20-pound note to a man behind them, asking him to get drinks. My leg's killing me, he muttered. Susie looked at him, noticing how pale and worn he looked. What's wrong with your leg? She asked. I hiked too much. My hip's shot, he replied, looking miserable. Susie could see how much pain he was in. His face was gray and drawn, and the reality of his situation hit her hard. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Susie leaned across the table and kissed Stan, her voice trembling. Listen to me, Stan. Don't hate me until you hear everything. I love you, and I'm so sorry for what I did. I'll never forgive myself for not being there when you needed me. I won't leave you until I die. Stan felt a cold emptiness. He didn't want to hear this, but it was better to know than live in the dark. Susie began hesitantly, and he pressed her to keep going. When she hesitated to name her lover, Stan demanded the truth. Shut up with the half-truths. I don't want to hear lies. She started crying again, but he didn't comfort her. After a moment, she spoke. His name is Clifford. I met him in law school. We only started talking again about work, but we didn't meet until yesterday. It wasn't an affair. Stan's voice was sharp. How many letters? 10? 100? More like 1,000, she admitted, avoiding his gaze. We never meant to meet. It wasn't like that. But then something happened, Stan pressed. His wife left him, she replied, shaking her head. You said it was a professional relationship, Stan said. And now you're telling me he came to you with his personal problems, and you stayed the night? It wasn't like that, Susie protested. It was late, and he was in a bad state. I didn't want to rush back. He's not my lover. Stan scoffed. He didn't know his marriage was falling apart. No, she said, her voice soft. We're not lovers, and I don't love him. Lies, Stan muttered, glaring at her. You spent the night comforting him. You both pretended there was no affair, but you lied to yourself to make it okay. Susie tried to defend herself. It wasn't like that. I didn't go there for that reason. Then why was it a secret? Stan shot back. Why didn't you tell me about it? I didn't need to, she said, voice shaking. There's nothing to hide. Stan's eyes narrowed. How do I know that? You'd lie about it, just like you've been lying to yourself. She stood silent for a long moment, then whispered, Maybe I do love him. I can't deny it, but that doesn't change how I feel about you. I'll always love you too. Stan's expression hardened. That doesn't change anything. When I needed you, you were comforting him. Maybe you never thought marriage came with responsibilities, not just benefits. No, Stan, Susie protested. If I had known you needed me, I would have come. You know that. Stan shook his head. You make it sound like you'd only help when it's convenient. That's not how marriage works. I tried to call you, she said, her voice breaking. But you were too busy with her to pick up. I couldn't reach you. Stan looked away. Come with me now. I won't hurt you anymore. We can get through this together. Stan shook his head again, staring blankly ahead. A waiter came over with their drinks, casually sliding a few coins onto the table. Use it for the rest, he said, smiling at Susie. And tomorrow, get out on those hills. Stan took a slow sip of his beer, thinking to himself, It's good you have someone else. I had a decent time today, despite everything. I'm not the same, but I don't need your pity. The health service will take care of me. I'll go home soon to pack for the hospital, but I won't get in your way. Come back with me, Susie pleaded. We'll get your car later. Stan shook his head. his expression distant. "I'll stay here as long as I can. While the weather's good, you should go back to him. Think about your future." "I'll stay with you," she insisted, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll make it work." Once more he shook his head. "I don't want you here. I don't want to feel angry. I want peace. Why should I have you reminding me of everything that's gone wrong in my life? You're just as much a symptom of the illness as the pain from my cancer. I don't need your pity or your spare time away from your lover." Their conversation was interrupted when Bella and Simone returned with drinks, but clearly didn't want to intrude on Stan and Susie's tense exchange. He embraced them both. "Don't mind me. If you have things to do at the university tomorrow, you should go. I'll manage on my own." "Will your wife stay?" Bella asked softly. He shook his head. "It's a tough life caring for a sick husband and a lover. She needs to go back." "We've decided to stay," Bella replied. "We can take the time, and we enjoyed our walk today so much that we'd like to continue tomorrow. But we won't take your bed. We'll sleep on the rugs in your room. If we all get up early, we can go with you in the morning and head straight to the university after. It's early enough for us." Tears welled up in Stan's eyes. How is it that strangers can be so kind? They even tried to protect his pride by suggesting they were staying for themselves, not for him. "Let's go up to Pillar and Steeple," Bella suggested gently. "I went up there in the clouds, and I'd love to see them in all their glory, but only if you want to." "I'm a vampire, draining the life out of you young women," Stan replied with a bitter smile. "I can only do this with your help." They assured him it was a great plan and went to bed. Susie left without Stan noticing. Susie was lost in her thoughts as she drove home through the narrow roads out of the Lake District. Exhausted and humiliated, she couldn't shake the feeling that Stan had more or less told her to leave. And why had Stan made such a scene with those girls? It felt like an attempt to humiliate her. The roads were empty, and by the time Susie reached the highway, she had come to terms with the fact that Stan might have had some reason for his behavior. She didn't want to upset him, but she did want to make things right. She needed time to show him she still cared and would do everything she could to support him through his illness. It was just bad luck that she hadn't answered the phone when he got his diagnosis, but if he let her go to the hospital with him, there would have been no problem. Stan would understand that once he calmed down. She was proud of herself for being honest about Clifford. No matter what happened now, Stan couldn't accuse her of lying. She would be ready for him to come home, confident that she could make things right. After all, it was in his best interest for her to take care of him, visit him at the hospital, and look after him when he returned home. She planned to talk to her employers and was sure they'd grant her maternity leave so she could focus entirely on caring for him. Tomorrow, she would tell Clifford what had happened. He would help her put everything into perspective, and he would understand that her husband had to come first now. She arrived home at 3 a.m, fell into bed, unwashed and exhausted, but convinced she had done the right thing. She fell asleep almost immediately. Meanwhile, Stan had returned to the hospital and sat alone in the oncology waiting room. The tests from his doctor had gone missing, and he couldn't be scheduled for surgery until they were found. He waited for an hour, feeling forgotten. The clerk eventually told him someone was waiting in the preparation room to retake the tests. He sat back on the bed in the small prep room, continuing to wait, feeling as though he was waiting for his life to be decided. There was nothing to read, nothing to look at outside the window. Another hour passed. Naturally, he had a lot to think about. Left alone in a quiet room, his anxiety began to escalate into panic. He must be a coward, he thought, as every muscle and nerve in his body urged him to leave. Why let the doctors operate on him when there was no hope? He also tried to make sense of his brief exchange with Susie. He returned home from the north overnight and arrived at 7 a.m. to find Susie waiting for him, sitting at the kitchen table, ready to leave for work. She told him she had packed a hospital bag for him and that she would visit him in the evening. He refused the coffee because he wasn't allowed to eat or drink before the appointment and told her not to worry about the visit. "I'll still be under anesthesia," he added. She asked about the surgery details and what special care he'd need when he returned home. Clifford wasn't mentioned, though he was clearly between them like a silent wall. "Don't come at all," Stan said bitterly. "I don't need your sympathy. And I might just think you're checking to see if I'm dying fast enough." He felt a sense of satisfaction with his words, but Susie looked like he'd struck her. "I won't come if you don't want me to," she replied sharply. "But don't pretend it's about me and Clifford. I've seen him once every 5 years because he needed a friend. Big deal." "Don't bother," Stan sneered. "This is just drama. Cheating is simple. It's about ego and people who can't control their greed, who lie because they think it's the easiest way. When they want something, they take it and everyone else can go to hell. Got it? Now leave. Susie left for work, holding back tears, and Stan felt a bit better after their confrontation. Alone in his room, he was suddenly overwhelmed with the desire to take control of his life. It had been a mistake to let doctors decide his fate. Before he could act on the thought, a young doctor came in, read his chart, and looked at him like a nervous student. "What are you doing here?" the doctor asked. "You should be in pre-op by now." "I was told I had to complete some tests first," Stan replied, frustrated. "That's nonsense," the doctor said. "Go to pre-op now." Stan stood up, his mind made up. Life couldn't get any worse, and it was time to stand up for himself. He walked out of the oncology ward, feeling lighter. By the time he reached his car, he knew he'd made the right decision. He had a few good days or weeks ahead, but the alternative of being sedated into unconsciousness on an operating table was worse. He would enjoy whatever time he had left. He stopped for coffee and a Danish before heading home, arriving 3 hours after Susie left for work. To his surprise, her car was in the driveway, along with an unfamiliar black BMW convertible blocking his spot. He parked on the road, walked past the car, and then went around the back of the house, not wanting to deal with any visitors. He retrieved the spare key from the pot of flowers in the greenhouse and let himself in through the kitchen. The coffee machine was brewing, but as he stood there, he heard voices in the hall, Susie's and a man's. He immediately knew it was Clifford. Despite everything, he wasn't prepared for the betrayal. The instinct to confront them was strong, but his anger was sapped by his illness. He felt stunned and unsure of what to do. Part of him found it almost comical to eavesdrop on the conversation, but he also knew he had to face them. He retreated to his small office, closed the door to muffle the voices, and sat down. His anger gradually settled, and the reality of the situation hit him. He shouldn't let Susie's betrayal dominate his final days. There were more important things to focus on. His eyes scanned the room, filled with memories, shelves of books, his stereo system, the old computer. He had made his decision. He would leave for good this time. He grabbed his bag of walking clothes, but before heading upstairs, his gaze landed on something atop a shelf, his grandfather's ceremonial swords. He took them down. These swords, passed down from his grandfather, had been given to him after his father's death. His grandfather had served in the Navy, participated in the hunt for the Bismarck, and had received the Distinguished Service Order. One of the swords had even been worn to Buckingham Palace when his grandfather received the award. As a child, Stan had imagined wielding the sword in grand battles. Now, holding one of the swords, he knew exactly what he needed to do. If Clifford and Susie thought their affair was justified, he had a surprise for them. He heard footsteps coming into the kitchen, and as Susie went for coffee, Stan quickly locked the kitchen door, securing himself in the hall. He then entered the living room where Clifford was standing by the fireplace. Clifford's smile froze when he saw Stan holding a sword in each hand. The two men stared at each other. Stan threw one of the swords toward Clifford, who stumbled back in shock as it clattered to the floor nearby. "If I were you," Stan said coldly, "I'd take her. You know who I am, so don't be surprised. I'm giving you a better chance than you gave me. Did you think I'd just let you take my wife? You thought I was already dead, didn't you? You made a mistake. Now we'll see how much you love her. Will you fight for her, or do you just want her if it's easy?" He paused, letting the silence hang. "This is a duel to the death. I have nothing to lose. Only one of us leaves here alive." Clifford looked terrified. "Where's Susie? Look, you've got this all wrong. Put the swords down and let me explain." Stan raised his sword, pointing it at Clifford. "Where's your pride? So you're willing to steal her but not fight for her. If you don't fight, you'll still die. I'll liquidate you like a dog. No seconds, no mercy. We'll find Susie and she can explain everything. But this is a duel. Be a man. Don't hide behind her." Clifford hesitated. "I don't think you stand a chance with my rusty blade in your ribs," Stan sneered. "No, trust me. This is not negotiable. You have 30 seconds to get ready. Then we fight." Clifford's face drained of color. "No, Susie asked me to come. She was upset, said you were sick and needed to go to the hospital. I came to help her. Nothing more." Stan's anger flared. "My wife isn't some consolation prize for you. Shame on you." 10 seconds, Stan said coldly. Clifford stayed still, realizing Stan wasn't joking. The room was thick with tension. Finally, Clifford grabbed the sword, raising it to parry Stan's strike. The clash of blades was sharp and dramatic. Stan paused, trying to steady himself. He was weak from illness, but he had trained with a foil in school. He raised his sword and swung at Clifford. not caring who won but wanting a good fight. It was more about proving something to himself. "We're fighting for Susie," Stan said. "Let's see if you'll die for her. I'll leave her for good if I win. Be a man." Stan attacked again, but Clifford dodged, almost cowering. The fight couldn't last long. The sound of banging from the kitchen distracted Stan for a moment. Clifford parried another blow, but now he started to counterattack. He raised his sword and lunged, but in his desperation he ran straight into Stan's blade. The sword shattered at the hilt, and Clifford collapsed to the floor, the jagged piece of steel lodged in his chest. Stan dropped his sword, his gaze fixed on Clifford, who lay motionless on the floor. He walked over and unlocked the kitchen door. "Stan, what did you do?" Susie rushed in and saw Clifford on the floor, blood everywhere. She knelt beside him, then hugged him. "It's too late," Stan said flatly. "Your lover paid the price for your choices." Stan didn't need to think too hard about what came next. He grabbed his bag and didn't even check if Clifford was dead. He was sure enough. He'd seen enough blood to know when the job was done. It wasn't about revenge. Eliminating Clifford hadn't fixed anything with Susie. He couldn't even bring himself to care about her anymore. Stan got in his car and drove. 10 miles, 20, he just kept going. He didn't know where, but he didn't want to think. He bought painkillers at gas stations along the way, knowing he'd need them for the pain, not to end things. He was avoiding the highways, worried about being recognized, but mostly, he didn't want to deal with what he'd done. By nightfall, he had found a quiet road near Kendal, spent the night sleeping in his car. The next morning, he drove to St. Bees Head, a starting point for a long walk across northern England. He had breakfast in a small cafe, then set off with just a light bag, water, chocolate, a waterproof jacket. For a while, he was alone, walking at a slow pace. But over time, others passed him, offering advice on the route and the weather. Some would stop for lunch or meet at pubs in the evening. It was tough, but peaceful, and no one asked him about the sword-wielding butcher they'd seen in the papers. He realized he no longer looked like the man Susie had once known, the man in the photographs the police had surely shown her. He walked about 10 miles a day. Some days the pain was unbearable, others it was manageable. Whenever he struggled, strangers would stop to help, offering to call for rescue, but Stan always convinced them to let him be. On more than one occasion, he was surrounded by people, practically carried by them. But each morning he found that he still had a few more steps in him. It could have been therapeutic if it didn't hurt so much. Over a week passed and the effort became routine, but the distance shrank every day, and he knew he would never make it to Robin Hood's Bay, the end of the trail. Most of the time he walked in a daze, numb from painkillers. Each step shot a sharp pain into his hip. One day the weather turned brutal. A strong wind whipped across the moors, and hail pelted him as he climbed 9 Standard's rig. The storm blinded him, and he lost his way, stumbling into a peat bog. After a great effort, he freed himself, but exhaustion and pain caught up with him. He found shelter beneath a stone ledge, but his foot slipped on a wet stone, and he fell, hitting the ground hard. This time there was no one around to help. He didn't know how far he had fallen. He could smell the wet peat, icy water trickled down his collar. Then everything went black. Meanwhile, Susie received a call late that night while having dinner at home. After so many silent weeks, she had stopped expecting news of Stan. The police gave her little information. He was in critical condition, in a hospital in Yorkshire, but he was also in police custody. Susie washed the dishes, trying to push aside her shock, then packed a thermos of coffee and some sandwiches, dressed warmly, and left. The drive would take about 4 hours, and the quiet road ahead gave her time to think. Could her life get worse? She probably didn't want to know. She arrived at the hospital and presented her ID to a sleepy officer at the entrance. Stan had been found unconscious in a bog by hikers and airlifted to the hospital, but had not regained consciousness since. Susie entered his room to find him lying still, hooked up to an oxygen mask. His face was pale, his eyes sunken deep. It was clear he was gravely ill. She sat quietly beside him for a long time, not knowing what to feel. Finally, she kissed his cheek, and to her surprise, he moved. His eyes fluttered open and his hand reached for hers. "Stop the pain," he whispered, holding her hand. His eyes opened fully, and he smiled weakly. "I'm glad you came, Susie." He seemed to drift back to sleep. Susie stayed beside him, still holding his hand. She was stunned by how frail he looked, torn by guilt for his condition, knowing it was tied to her betrayal. His ruined body was a consequence of her choices. She gently stroked the back of his hand, then asked a nurse about his pain management. The nurse explained that Stan had a fractured pelvis, but his cancer had already done too much damage. They were giving him the highest possible dose of morphine, but he was still in severe pain. Talk to him. Keep him distracted, the nurse suggested. Make him hold on. Susie sat back down next to Stan, trying not to disturb him. After a while, he opened his eyes again and looked at her. She reached out and gently touched his face. I'm sorry, Stan, for everything. I wasn't there when you needed me, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I'm not leaving you now. It's ruined, Susie, Stan replied slowly, his voice barely audible. It's not your fault. You're here now. That's all that matters. Susie leaned closer as he pulled off the oxygen mask. I'm sorry I liquidated your friend, he whispered. He deserved it. But it's not right that I took him from you. You deserve someone to take care of you. I want you, Susie said, her voice breaking. It's not fair. He looked at her, his gaze steady. Despite his broken body, his eyes still seemed alive. After a long pause, he said, That's how it should be. We had something once. It's better to love and lose, as they say. Not everything was in vain. I need your help to die, Stan whispered, his voice barely audible. After that, I want you to live. Find someone who will take care of you and forget about me and all this mess. Don't say that, Stan, Susie cried, tears streaming down her face. I'm here and I'll stay. I never stopped loving you. You don't understand, he gasped. The pain's too much. I can't handle it. I don't even deserve this. We need to say goodbye, and then I want you to help me leave forever. She knew he was serious. It would be like murder if she helped him die. Was this a test? To see if she'd love him enough to liquidate for him? Her tears flowed, unsure what to do but consumed by her own despair. Stan's body jerked in pain. He gripped the sheets, his eyes closing, unmoving. She stroked his face, whispering soothing words, but felt powerless. Desperate, she called for help. A young doctor appeared and reviewed the medical records at the end of Stan's bed. He avoided looking at Stan. He needs something for the pain, Susie said urgently. We're doing all we can, the doctor replied, eyes not meeting hers. More would risk his health. The consultant will review his meds later. You're not addressing the pain, Susie said, her frustration growing. What are you saving him for? More suffering? The doctor shook his head. You're upset. It's better to take a break. Have some coffee. Gather yourself. Furious. Susie leaned over Stan, kissed him on the lips and whispered, I'm sorry, Stan. I was trying to help. She kissed his forehead and left, exhausted and emotionally drained. Despite everything, a strange mix of excitement and sorrow filled her. The policeman at the entrance stood up when she passed. Go home and get some rest, he said kindly. Things will look clearer in the morning. In her car, Susie realized she had no place to go. The thought of driving 200 miles back home was unbearable. The sky was beginning to lighten, and she curled up in the seat, falling asleep. At 11 a.m., her phone rang. She woke with a stiff neck and dry mouth, disoriented. It was the ward administrator delivering the news. Stan had passed away during the night. She was told she could pick up his belongings, which would be kept for 24 hours. Susie stepped out of the car and noticed a parking ticket. She walked through the hospital, finding Stan's room prepared for a new patient. She went to the nurse's station, and when the nurse saw who she was, she handed over Stan's phone and wallet. Stan's at the morgue, the nurse said, explaining that the death certificate listed carcinoma and traumatic injuries as the cause of death. No autopsy will be done. With aggressive cancers like his, the body just gives up. The nurse's words felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. After a month, Susie walked the coast-to-coast route, following in Stan's footsteps. It would have been nice to do it with him, but she found comfort in the solitude the journey brought. She left an apology for Stan under a stone, a message she never had the chance to share. When she returned home, Susie found she had lost interest in her job. A large insurance payout allowed her to quit. The house, full of memories of Stan, was too much to bear. She sold it and moved to London, where she found a low-paying job as a legal advisor for a charity helping young offenders. Her work consumed her, and she met many kind, generous people, some of whom she went out with, though she gained a reputation as distant and dry. Every year she went on hiking trips. Her last was the GR20 route in Corsica. Stan would have loved it, she thought, remembering his passion for hiking. About a year later, Susie received an invitation to a memorial for Clifford. She debated attending, but ultimately decided to go. The service at St. George's Cathedral was attended by around 500 people, and Clifford seemed to have been an important figure. As she watched his family mourn, she couldn't connect them to the man she had known. The service was followed by a reception, But Susie chose to leave early and return to work. She wasn't ready to be part of that world.